Johnson, Senator Fillmore, and is there anyone else? And Representative Clancy has also joined us. So we appreciate them being online, and thank you to committee members who are on time and in the room. We appreciate it. So just for everyone in the room, in case you didn't know what we're going to be talking about today, on the agenda is transparency in curriculum, parental engagement and access, and a review of sensitive material policies in schools. So we appreciate the 5 school districts who are here today to help answer questions from committee members, share your perspective, as well as the State Board of Education and the different members of the public who have also come. Again, if you would like to give public comment, we actually have a sign-up sheet to try and organize things right over here in the corner, so please make sure that you do that. If you are participating online, when the time comes, you'll need to raise your virtual hand. Just a reminder, we do have a new rule passed during the last session that if you are participating online, you're going to need to turn on your camera, give us your actual name, not a fake name, and where you're from. So we appreciate that. All right, it looks like we are ready to go. So the first motion I will need is an approval of the minutes from May 17th meeting. That motion is moved by Representative Peterson. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes from May 17th say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion is passed and the minutes are approved. Okay, we will get on to the meat of the agenda today. We want to be respectful of your time and also have time to engage in questions with the committee. So first, we will actually start with an introduction by our committee staff. Attorney Mike Curtis will summarize legal requirements imposed by recent legislation and kind of give an overview of that. Just so people know who's up next, afterwards we'll have Logan School District and their superintendent, and I believe a board members here as well. And then after that will be Jordan School District. We'll go from there before we jump to the remainder of the agenda. So, Mike, let me get your mic turned on. There you go.
Hi, Senators, Representatives, members of the public. My name is Mike Curtis, attorney for the committee, one of 3 and one of 6 members of staff for the committee. As Representative Perucci said, I'll be presenting briefly about transparency, parent access, and sensitive materials. And just 2 brief disclaimers before I get started. One, so we are employed by the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel, which is a nonpartisan office. So we do not speak in favor or against legislation. So I'm going to talk about several pieces of legislation today. And both my analysis of statute and legislation is just my best effort to analyze for you and not in favor or against. Second disclaimer is that this is a brief presentation, so I'm not trying to capture all of the potentially relevant statutes about transparency or parent access. We do have the one and only section on sensitive materials, so I can be 100% on that one, but not apologies while we work out the technical difficulties. Sure, if you have it, that's fine. Here, let's try. If Micah has it, we can share it that way, it's fine. Perfect. Okay. So apologies for the delay. So we're going to briefly talk about the existing code related to transparency. Then we'll talk about legislation that passed and then legislation that did not. And then we'll repeat the same approach for the sensitive materials. So go ahead, Micah. In 2021, Senator Grover had a bill that enacted this provision both for districts and charter schools, but the requirement is essentially that local school boards have to make curriculum readily accessible and available for public view, notify parents how to access the curriculum, and include on the LEA's website information about how to access it. So that's kind of our baseline for the legislation we saw in 2023. SB 55 was the one transparency bill that did pass. So here, there's a distinction between instructional material, which is material that the local board actually for use in the LEA, and then supplemental material would be educator-selected materials supplementing the approved material. So the bill required a local process for the board to approve and adopt instructional material, and then required the local board also to have a supplemental material policy. Didn't dictate what should have a policy to give guidance to educators. And then finally, it required a provision in LEA's contracts for online and digital material, just to give notice, requiring the vendor to give notice of any changes to online or electronic material. So moving on to the next. There were two bills that did not make it across the finish line that were related. So HB 344 required LEAs to create a course content transparency policy. Identified sort of a few of the questions, but essentially asking a few different ways of how educators should make content available to parents. Should it be in a syllabus? Should they give regular updates? Should parents and students have access to view course content before registering? And then how do they access material that isn't available on the district's learning management system? There was also HB 82, school assembly notice requirements. That required 3 days advance notice of assemblies that were based on certain topics. You can see a list there: mental health, substance abuse, suicide prevention. The third substitute to that bill also added educational equity and relied on the USBE definition, and then also provided an exception for exigent circumstances for emergencies. Also, the third sub removed a requirement for LEAs to provide resources to parents that were related to those assembly topics. And then next, this is a bill that is related to transparency, but also bleeds into the library question. Go next. This is HB 465. This simply required LEAs to provide an online platform that would allow parents to view what their child has checked out from the school library, and a history of those checkouts. This has a sort of a delayed implementation deadline, so August 1st for districts and charters with 1,000 or more students of 2024, and then August 1st, 26 for smaller districts and charters. So let's go on to the next. So we've covered in October and November of last year in this committee the sensitive materials statute. So I won't go as in-depth as we did last time. But one important note is that it applies to everything. It's been, I think, discussed as a library material statute, and I think for good reason. That's probably one of the places in schools and districts that have the most amount of material. But it applies to anything, printed, electronic, visual, audio, really anything, in a school setting, which includes classroom, library, or on school property. So we're not just talking about books in libraries. As you look at different district policies, I think they do tend to focus on libraries. So it's important just to recognize the distinction between the statute, which applies to pretty much any kind of communication material in a school setting, and then policies that might be more specific to libraries. But the definition of sensitive material relies on definitions in the criminal code for pornographic or indecent material. And as you see on the screen, there are 3 different statutes that contain standards that are used here. All of them are somewhat subjective or require a balancing test, except for those three on the right in 76, 10, 12, 27. So a description or depiction of human genitals in a state of sexual stimulation or arousal, acts of human masturbation, sexual intercourse or sodomy, or fondling, other erotic touching of human genitals or pubic region. So that constitutes what's been called the bright line rule. So there's no opportunity for a district or a school to consider the work taken as a whole, serious literary artistic value when we're talking about those three standards. If a material contains those, it meets the definition and it's sensitive material and is not allowed in schools. For the rest, you'll see that you take the material as a whole and you evaluate sort of its artistic value in light of maybe the content that would otherwise be categorized as pornography. So let's go ahead on to the next. There were a few bills that dealt with this section. HB 138, as you can see, kind of took a journey through the session, had three different short titles and seven substitutes, six that were at least public, so 7 versions. So I won't kind of walk through each of these, but I think at the beginning it started with a requirement that we saw in SB 55 already, a contract requirement for vendors to provide notice if the online material changes after the LEA contracts for that material. It took a bit of a journey and ended up losing that digital distinction and focusing on 53G 10 103, which is the sensitive material statute we just looked at, and drew some concepts from Representative Ivory's HB 464, which I'll touch on in just a second, and ended up not getting a vote on the Senate floor. So that's where it ended in the session. Let's go on to the next. And then HB 465, I mentioned it before. The original version, the introduced version contained amendments to the sensitive material statute, which were then removed to just focus on that online platform. But originally it required an initial determination. So when a school or an LEA got a challenge on a given material, there would have to be some sort of initial determination whether there was reasonable cause that it contained sensitive material. And if, based on that initial determination, there was reasonable cause, the bill would have required the book to be pulled right away, or the material. See, I'm calling them books too, even though I just told you it's more than books. Also added a 60-day timeline to complete the full review and required parental notification if a student checked out a book that was currently under review that had been challenged. And then lastly, Representative Ivory's HB 464. This was circled on the House floor, so it didn't make it out of the House. But it similarly required immediate removal of challenged material. And then that was the introduced rule. The first substitute would have required removal if the challenge was based on that bright line rule. It would have required a written public determination explaining the LEA's reasoning and rationale if it chose to retain a challenged material. Required an LEA referral of substantiated sensitive material to the state board, and then would have required the state board to undertake its own review to establish sort of precedent for the state. And essentially, if the state board determined that a material contained sensitive material, then that material would be prohibited across the state in all LEAs. Placed a timeline on that USBE review as well. Set a limit of 3 challenges for a given individual per material per school year. So I know that's kind of a wordy qualification, but the idea is if one individual challenges the same material 3 times, then they're limited. But it would not limit a person to just 3 challenges, just 3 challenges on the same material in the same school year. Then it would have required the state board to develop an age appropriateness rating system, and provided a few factors that were necessary to include: language, criminal activity, self-harm, drug use, suicidal ideation, and sexual content, including sexuality and gender identity. Required LEAs to ensure parental notice and consent before allowing student access to material that was not on that student's age level based on that rating system. And then provided for some judicial review with costs and fees, as well as some fines that would have gone into the Crime Victim Reparations Fund. So again, those are bills that did not pass, but that was sort of the discussion during the last session. Just to clarify a little bit more on what the law actually is, the law prohibits sensitive material in schools. It does not prohibit an LEA from removing a book from its library or removing any other material from student access. There is some confusion over whether that statute sort of preempts all LEA action on materials, and it does not. It's simply a prohibition on sensitive material. So let's go one more. So you may have heard some news stories about the Bible. We're going to hear from Davis District a little bit later, and this was discussed as well in administrative rules on Monday. So I won't dwell too much on it, but I am available for questions. Essentially, there was a challenge filed at the end of 2022. Per Davis School District policy, there's a sensitive material review committee, actually many, but made up of 3 educators and 4 parents who are chosen through a lottery that they volunteer to be a part of. And then the Davis School District has several standards for considering whether a material constitutes sensitive material. That committee found that the Bible does not violate state statute. So to be clear, that statute we just talked about, the decision of the Davis Review Committee was that it did not violate that statute. What the decision, though, was to pull the Bible from elementary and junior high schools, leave it in high schools, and the basis for that was the district's policy requiring the committee to consider age appropriateness for vulgarity or violence. And that's the stated reason for the decision on the Bible. Now, there's nothing in the law that prohibits a district from having additional criteria or policies or factors to consider. There, also in the Davis policy, they created an appeals process, and that's the point we're at right now. So multiple appeals. Last I heard was 2, but there may be probably more. Were filed at the end of May, so after the school year ended. So the appeal process in Davis is that there's an appeal committee that's made up of 3 members of the elected board that make a recommendation to the full board. And then the full board will have a vote to either uphold or reverse the decision of the review committee. So we are not at the end of the road in the Davis policy. And with that, Madam Chair, I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that, and we appreciate our staff and all the preparation that went into this. And we appreciate the overview of our glorious last session on the House side. Most of that just went over to the Senate side. So we appreciate that. And if we have, I don't see any questions from committees, but we're glad you're here so we can ask questions throughout the committee. So next up, we're going to have representatives from Logan School District. It looks like we've got Superintendent Frank Schofield up on the agenda. If you want to hop on up. And it also looks like a board member is coming with you, or is it just you today? It's on.
It is just.
Great. That's
We
just
had
fine.
we just finished a two-day board workshop, and our board members had some family and work commitments.
Yeah,
They
I
were
know
not
it's a
able
busy time of
to be
year,
down
so
here today, so
Thank
we
you.
apologize for that.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Go ahead with your presentation. And just so committee members, you should all have the agenda in front of you, but our first two districts that we have coming up, one of the things we really wanted to talk about, this presentation shows we reviewed over 63 bills last session as a committee, and at least a dozen of them were on curriculum transparency, parental access, engagement, and we thought it would be helpful to have a committee that we actually were able to bring in districts and ask, what are you doing on the ground? And for us as committee members to be able to see that in action. So Logan School District's been invited specifically for that purpose, as well as Jordan School District, who will be next. And I want to make sure everyone's aware of where we're at. So go ahead. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. So I'm happy to be here, share some of this information. I do have a very short presentation. I can take you, and the presentation will just give an overview of some of the things that we are doing. If you'd like to see specifics, I do have it set up where we can go to some of the specifics on our websites, and you can see what parents see and how they would access that information. So I've separated out into the resources that are available to all patrons of our community versus resources that are available only to parents of enrolled students. So on the first slide, you see on our district website, of course, they have access to our district policies, which include our standards of media appropriateness, for our process for selection of materials, our process for reconsideration of materials, et cetera. And then they can go in and start accessing both our elementary and our secondary materials.
Do you have a presentation you're working off of?
I do.
Okay, we'd love to see it.
I am flattered that you think I'm doing that by memory.
That's
Thank
okay.
you so much. You just made my day.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. You're live now.
No, thank you for asking early. So we do on our district website have an overview of our policies and processes. We also have an overview of the curriculum materials that are approved by the board as instructional materials for both our elementary and secondary. One of the things that we've seen is we previously had a very comprehensive list of those resources. As we've done audits over the last year, we've recognized areas where those haven't been up to date, so those sites are currently down as we're working with our staff to update them and make sure they are accurate. But we do have things that the board has approved, for example, our science curriculum, our elementary math and language arts. If you go to our school websites, of course, at our high school, parents have access to the course catalog so they can see our course offerings. Any patron can go to our school library catalog and see what books are available in our media centers. And on every school's curriculum website, we also have the link to our reconsideration of materials policy, as well as an online form that patrons can fill out if they want a material to be reviewed. Representative Perucci, would you like me to go to the website and show some of those, or?
No, I think it could, yeah, let's do it. If you've got it
Okay.
linked and it won't be hard to go over, I think it's helpful for us to see that.
No, we can go to a couple things really quickly. So here on district information on our website, of course, we go, oh, that took me someplace I didn't want to go.
We now know how to contact you.
Yeah, now you're there. What we're trying to do is show our policy. We'll screen down there. So if we go to our online policy manual, all of our policies are cataloged as they are in many districts. You go to curriculum and learning, and we have there all of our standards for media use, our materials, appeals procedures, reconsideration of media, et cetera. So everything is readily accessible for any parents who want to have access to that information. As we go into our departments and go, well, for example, our elementary schools, we have the curriculum link on the side, and parents can immediately see here are professional development resources that we use for teachers. Here are the state curriculum resources that we use in our schools, and then we link to specifics. For example, with our English language arts for elementary, we now go to a page and parents can find the program components. They can see a welcome letter, an overview of the program. They can go into the specific materials, book chapters, et cetera, and they can view all of those. Anyone can view these through the district website in general. So those are all available there, and then if you go to a school website, just again to show you what it looks like for a parent, if you go to parents, parent resources, and right there you have the link to our student curriculum. our request for reconsideration of media materials. And if we go down to the media center, this is where parents can go on, where any patron can go on first and they can view what's in our catalog. This is also the site where parents can log in and they can search their child's history of what materials they've checked out. So you do have to have a parent login to be able to see that, but anyone can search the database of books that are available. So the next slide there that we have is the resources specifically for parents. We do a lot of our business through our Logan City School District app, which is done through ParentLink, or previously known as Blackboard. This is where parents will be able to access not only the logistical information for their student lunch account balances, student grades, et cetera, but this is also where they can access their child's Canvas courses. They can access the media information and logging in again to the Destiny system to be able to see what books their child has checked out from the library. I can't show you all of those because this is mine and I don't currently have a child in our district. But this is the information to be able to see. Of course, our big tool that we use for curriculum is Canvas, as many districts do. Parents can have a login to Canvas. We send them the information as part of course registration at the start of the year on how to log into Canvas. We then monitor the parents who have not logged into the app or Canvas, and we send them additional information during the year of, we see you haven't logged in, here's, as a reminder, here are the tools that you need to log in to be able to see what curriculum your child is working on.
Superintendent Schofield, I think we do have a question for that. I have one. So what I was going to ask is, do you know what percentage of parents log in or get onto Canvas with their kiddo?
I don't have that
I don't know
off the
how
top
you
of
would-
my head. I
I
apologize.
don't know how you would, I didn't know if there's like a survey that goes out and you have volunteer information from people.
We haven't asked that on our patron input surveys, but that'd be an interesting question to ask just to see what level of participation we do have.
Okay.
That's a great idea.
It looks like Representative Lund has a question for you right now on that
Thank you,
slide.
Madam Chair. Just a quick question on the teacher contact. How extensive is that information? I'd hate to have all of their personal information, phone numbers, addresses, those type of things concerns me, but how extensive do you contemplate that to be?
So in terms of what are the parents to communicate with teachers?
Yes, and addresses, email
Sure.
addresses.
We
personal phone
do, of
numbers.
course, their school email. We discourage our teachers from releasing any personal phone numbers or emails. We have tried to limit the tools, and let me explain why I say that use the term limit, the tools that are used to communicate with parents. And the reason for that is as we've worked with parents, they've said, if I have, let's say, two elementary students, a student in the middle school and one at the high school, then I have if I have one at each level, I have the potential of 10 different teachers that I'm receiving information from. If they're all using a different app, someone's using Class Dojo, someone's using Remind, someone's using GroupMe, someone's using the district app, then I as a parent am managing multiple different tools for communication. So we've told our staff, here are the tools you can use. You can use district email, you can use the app, which also has the ability to text parents, but it doesn't release the teacher's individual phone number, or you can use, we allow GroupMe. So you can use that to bring parents together, or I believe it's GroupMe. But we discourage the release of the teacher's personal cell phone and email information. We do have teachers who share that with parents who, let's say, for example, you have a child who is experiencing some major emotional issues or health issues and their attendance is spotty because of that. Teachers will reach out to the parent and to facilitate prompt communication when a child has a need. Sometimes that the teacher's private contact information will get out in that way, but it's something that the individual teacher chooses to share, not something that the district distributes.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Lund. Representative Moss is your question for this slide. Okay, here you go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question has to do with are teachers required to put certain things on Canvas? I mean, besides their syllabus? And before you answer, I'll just illustrate my daughter who teaches in Granite District High School English has often said to me Sunday night, oh, I'm putting everything on Canvas that I'll be teaching this week. And I think, you know, a lot of teachers do that. But one of the bills that was proposed and not passed would force teachers to put 30 days and then stick to that, which is impossible if you're a good teacher, that you don't vary things or have different changes because kids aren't up to speed on that. So what requirements, if any, do you have for what they must put on Canvas?
Thank you. We require our teachers, of course, to have their sees all of that information, but then any content that they're going to be teaching, the units, the modules, their assessments, et cetera, those all should be on Canvas. The challenge, as you brought out, with a stipulation on a time frame, you know, how far in advance does that information need to be on Canvas, and is there flexibility for modifying that content, is that as a teacher is working with their classes, they are going to often see a need to make modifications in the sequence of instruction. We need to spend more time on this concept, et cetera. And they may become aware of additional materials that can better address the needs of their students based on the needs that they're identifying as they assess. So we require our teachers to put all of their content on Canvas so a student could access it. If they're ill, you know, they have access to the information that's being covered. If they're ill for an extended period, they can still access the course information that they'll be covering in class, and their parents can view that as well. We don't put a time frame on when modifications to that can be made because we feel that decreases the flexibility that the teacher needs to have to respond to student needs as they come up.
Thank you. That's very important for me, and I think the public. When I was teaching old school, I wrote it on the whiteboard. I did have a whiteboard for the week, but I'd frequently say, okay, the test will not be Friday because we haven't covered all the material. And that's what that bill didn't take into account. And I want the public and the parents to know that good teachers, creative teachers, have to alter it depending on whether the material is covered before they can test. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We do have one more question for you, then we'll let you move forward in your presentation. Representative Lisenby?
Back to the previous slide. So I noticed at the bottom, your bottom bullet point, access checkout history. What platform do you use for your library materials?
We use Destiny.
Do you? So you just give the parents the login for the Destiny so that they can see their.
Yeah, so what we do is when a child registers for school, we send the information to the parent. Here's how you can access Destiny. Both check out, send information to check out books, but you can also view what materials your child has checked out at school. And then, again, our IT department monitors who is and is not accessing the app. So for those parents who haven't been accessing it, we resend the information periodically to make sure that they have their login information. There's a website they go to. Here's how you can look up the student login. So let's say a parent has lost their printout. They can contact the teacher and say, hey, can you give me my child's login information? There's a website the teacher goes to, pulls it up, can send it to the parent. So they can get that information either through our standard method of sending the paperwork to them, or they can contact their child's teacher and they can pull that information up for them on the computer.
Thank you. Madam Chair, could I follow up?
Yeah.
Thank you. So my comments pertain to this discussion, but also later discussions as we are contemplating how to best serve parents and students and help parents protect students from materials they don't want their students to see. I think, and I would just ask you about all of the districts that are going to present, what is their policy for allowing a parent to tell the librarian or their teacher, like, here's the list of books, and then I know that in Destiny, they can go in and it will send an alert if a child tries to check out a book that the parent has designated. Are you doing that in your district? And then I'll just ask that of every district that comes up.
I'm not sure I'm in Destiny itself. So in terms of the process of flagging the book in Destiny, I'm not sure. What I do know is if our practice and what our training is that if a parent has a book that they don't want their children to read, that they can communicate that to the teacher and to the school's media specialist. And that now is tracked, and they monitor that, so they make sure that the child can't check that book out. I think our specialists in our elementaries, we have a little more turnover with our media specialists than we do at our secondary schools. So the process of training them on all the capabilities of Destiny, we have some that I think will follow use that tool, as you described, a little more consistently than others. But yes, those who are familiar with it know that they can put that in there, and we do make sure that if a parent has requested a book not be read by their child, that's monitored by the media specialist.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam
Thank
Chair.
you. We've got one more on this slide from Representative Moss.
Yeah, not necessarily a question, but to the other Representative Moss's comment. We often think of this transparency as like making sure nothing's bad is taught in the classroom or things that could be concerning. I actually look at it through this lens of a parent. I see this homework sometimes and I'm like, it's been 40 years since I've looked at this, and things are different. And if they're teaching a new concept or a different way, and I as a parent don't have some kind of information to look to and say, well, let me kind of see exactly what they're trying to do here. To me, that's why I think this is so helpful. I'm very grateful that you are trying to get those, if it's additional work that's being added or new things that are being taught, workbooks, whatever that is. I'm really grateful that you're putting on that from the sake of a parent, so thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's a really big issue with fifth grade math. Like, wait, got it this way?
Okay, great. Okay, seeing no further questions from the committee, we'll let you continue. And then if we can, as committee members, we'll hold our questions till the end so that we can get through this. We do have 4 other districts who are going to present, so go ahead.
So just a quick example. This is from a high school chemistry class, just to say parent would see when they log into their child's Canvas course, their policies, access to the and then you start moving into, this teacher actually puts, here's the invitation to participate in the Remind app. So here's how you can get communication as a parent. And then you start going through, here are the assignments, here are the modules that we're going to have. So a parent can see the entire curriculum that they'll be covering over the course of the year. And then when a teacher updates this, they receive alerts. Some samples of what we do in just a couple other syllabi, so you can see how we communicate what content's going to be covered. This is from our musical production class. You'll see they note to the parents, we're going to be working on Big Fish. In the spring, we'll be doing the play Wait Until Dark. And in the spring musical, we'll be doing the Drowsy Chaperone. So at the start of the year, these students and their parents receive notice of, here are the works that we're going to be doing over the course of the year. Parents have plenty of time to contact the teacher if they have any concerns. They can look up reviews of this content online. They can do anything they need to do to make sure they're comfortable with the content that their children are going to be focusing on over the course of the year as they participate in theater. In our sample syllabus from our English 11 class, you see there in italics, these are the texts that we're going to be reading. Declaration of Independence, Huckleberry Finn, Great Gatsby, Mice and Men, A Raisin in the Sun, as well as various works from these other authors. So again, parents have the information at the start of the class. Here's what we're going to be covering. If you have any questions about these texts, please reach out to the teacher, contact us, and we can talk through them and work with that process. The third step that we do is, as part of this, and this really ties both to instructional and supplemental materials, is just making sure there's an open and clear process. Of course, our process for the board to approve instructional materials includes open meetings, public notifications of those meetings, access to the printed materials in the school or the district office so parents can come and view those as part of the approval process, and then including the list of improved instructional materials on our district website, which, as I said, is currently being updated. In terms of supplemental materials, as was stated and is part of the law, our teacher teams we give them the autonomy to select those. And we've given definitions of here's what's a supplemental material and here's how you need to work with your team. We do ask that with the supplemental materials, particularly at the secondary level, that teachers not select those in isolation, but they collaborate with their team, either their grade level or their content area team, and that as they are selecting those materials, the principal then receives a notification of that. So there's still discussion about whether this is an appropriate material for this age group, for this course. So it's not having the teacher be out on an island. They're still discussing it with their peers. If a potentially controversial supplemental material is suggested by a team or a teacher, that is reviewed first by the colleagues at the school, it's reviewed by the principal, and then we ask the teacher to communicate that with parents in advance. And just an example of how this has worked, we had a teacher last year who wanted to read the book Ghost Boys. And Ghost Boys is a book about police violence, particularly against young men of color. And this teacher wanted to read the book because of some of the interests and the personalities of the students in her class. So she took it to her colleagues. They read the book. They said, okay, yeah, we get what's going on, and we see how this could be potentially controversial, but we also see what the author does to not vilify, law enforcement and not victim blame these other students. It was then went to the administration. I reviewed it, and we said, okay, we understand what you want to do. We understand why you want to read this book. Here's what you need to do to be able to use it in class. You need to communicate with parents at the start of the term. This is a book that we plan on reading. Here's how you can find out more about the book. Here's a summary of the book. If you have questions, please contact me so we can talk through that. That process was followed. There were no parent concerns. They were able to have access to the materials in advance. And because that transparency was there, the parents of the students in these classes felt that that was appropriate, and there were no problems with it. But it's because our teacher went through that process with their colleagues, with their administration, and then sent that out to parents in advance. So with that, what we've seen is as we follow that process, if there are concerns, teachers are able to either address those or recognize, all right, if 50% of the parents in your class are questioning whether this is an appropriate text, it's probably time to look at an alternative material to use instead of that. So with that, our approach to how we've applied these guidelines really relates a little bit to this phrase by Brene Brown, clear is kind. And we tend to view that in just the quality of our personal conversations. But the more clear we are about the curriculum that we're providing, we're kind to the student because the student knows what's expected of them and what they're going to be learning. We're kind to the parent, as Representative Moss mentioned, because the parent knows what's going on in class. The parent knows how to best support their child. And we're kind to the teacher because if the teacher is transparent and the school is transparent in advance, there are fewer concerns that tend to come up. So the teacher spends less time addressing concerns and more time focusing on how to continue to promote the student's learning. From a purely selfish standpoint, it's also kind to the superintendent and the board because the more transparency and the more clarity there is on what we're trying to accomplish, generally the fewer concerns there are, and we spend less time having to resolve concerns and we spend more time partnering between schools and parents to promote student learning and success. So be happy to take any additional questions that you have.
Thank you, Superintendent. We appreciate that presentation. I think it is helpful for us to see. We all graduated at different times on this committee, but to see the online portal, I think, is helpful on what's going on now. Chairman Johnson does have a question.
Yeah, I just want, I appreciate your presentation, and I think what you've outlined is really good. I think if people actually paid, like you have, paid some attention to what really is the intent of these rules, I think things would be a lot smoother. And, transparency for parents is an important thing to me, and I know my fellow legislators. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions from the committee, we'll close that up. If you can send that, if you haven't already, email that to staff. We need
I'll
to
send
get it
it
up on
to-
our committee materials. That'd be fantastic. We are going to need to do a little bit of musical chairs with the agenda. I know that Superintendent Linford has a hard stop and needs to go. So if it's okay with everyone in the room who is presenting, text staff if you have something. But we're going to shift down to Davis School District. So we're shifting gears a little bit. This will be specifically, the superintendent will be presenting on their process and progress for implementing sensitive material requirements And to my own home district, Jordan School District, thank you for being flexible. So I appreciate it. All right. And to the committee members, if you are able to hold your questions till the end, great. But if not, if it's relevant for that slide, go ahead and signal by, like, of course, pushing on your mic. So thank you for joining us. Obviously, we have more than the superintendent here. So if you can just introduce yourself so we know who we have presenting, that'd be fantastic.
That's great. I'm Dan Linford, Superintendent.
Liz Mumford, Board President.
Superintendent.
Ben Onofrio, Counsel for the District.
All right, go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Johnson, Honorable Committee. It's great to be with you today. We appreciate your time and your service to the citizens of Utah and to us. I sat in front of this committee earlier this year, and I told this committee that it's our intent to follow not just 374, but all of the state statutes. Since then, we've received great guidance from our Attorney General, from the State Board of Education with their model policy, and we've done our best to follow that and implement that in a very transparent way, using parent committees and other resources available to us. So I'd like to jump into the presentation and talk about our timeline just a little bit. Really not the timeline, but what we see as our response and the best data we have in terms of responding to this law. We have, as you can see, we've reviewed 101 books. We've removed 37 titles from circulation, and we've completed 60 reviews, and we have several reviews in process, as you can see, and many of those titles have been appealed. The appeal part of our process is critical to us because it channels all of these various committees. It was mentioned that we have several. We have 14 to 15 committees operating at any given time. And our appeals process allows those committees, as you can imagine, like lower courts that feed into upper courts that overturn decisions all the time. We count on our appeals process to really leverage a common body that will be able to oversee all of those and review all of those decisions if they're appealed. So I remind the committee that we are in the middle of the process, and we hope to be able to continue that process before determinations are made about the value of the policy. That said, we have appreciated the feedback we've received. As you can imagine, we've received an immense amount of feedback, and as we continue to improve our policies to not only comply with the law, but to serve our citizens the best that we can, we appreciate that. Because it's been brought up, if I could, I'd like to make just a quick statement about the Bible, because I know that decision by one of our review committees has been controversial. It's been controversial in my community and throughout the state. And for that, I do apologize. For that, it's incumbent upon us to continue to review the policy and make sure that we can apply it in a way that in the future we can avoid those kinds of controversies. But I will say, in a democracy, sometimes those things happen. And we've been anxious to watch our policy be seen through to fruition to see how that works out. So I'm going to ask a few members of my team here to speak to elements of this presentation. I'm going to ask President Mumford, President of the Davis School District Board of Education, to talk about our timeline. And then I'll ask Dr. Logan Toon to discuss our policy and some of the elements that maybe haven't materialized in the brief description. We appreciate Mr. Curtis for his apt description of our policy, and Dr. Toon is also tasked with implementing that policy, so he will answer several questions as well.
Thank you, Dr. Linford, and thank you, committee, for hosting us today. We appreciate the opportunity to talk policy with you. It's really important for us to get this right. I'm not going to spend too much time on the timeline that's part of our presentation because I think Mr. Curtis covered that. very well, and you're familiar with the process. But I think the key features that we want to point out are the level of board engagement in this process, because it's very important for us to be accountable and to have a transparent policy. And so that came through our policy process. There was significant work by our board last summer after the model policy came out from the state board. And even prior to that, we looked at our previous practices, what was working, what wasn't working, how we could do better at managing our library processes. And so we were prepared to start the school year off with the policy in place, and we met those expectations that were given by USBE. Some key things that I think is important to remember, that as I speak on behalf of our board, is every member of our board is committed to following state law, and we all share a commitment to the spirit of that bill, that we want to get sensitive materials and inappropriate content out of our school and use legal and appropriate processes to do that. And an important component for us is that community engagement, and we've done that through committees. We have other channels on our website where publics can make comment, where the appeals can be challenged. There's lots of avenues where we want to bring in the members of our community, and we feel accountable to them as elected officials in this process. And we are receptive to the opportunity to look back on the past year at our policy and at the laws, and figure out how we can do this in a more timely way, because we really want to get back to the work of teaching students. That's our primary purpose. And right now, a lot of resources are being expended on some hot button issues, and we really want to keep our libraries places of learning that support our student success. So we appreciate the dialogue about policy.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us a moment to explain our policy and process here. I'll briefly highlight the key aspects of our policy, and I appreciate Mr. Wood and Chair Perucci for allowing us to distribute a copy to you. You should have a copy of our policy as it stands today. If not, we can make sure that gets delivered digitally to you as well. Our current process requires a committee review of all community challenges. Challenge is when a person asks us to review a material for whether it's appropriate for inclusion, primarily in libraries, as this is the major context of our discussion today. We receive the review, and the review is given to our teaching and learning director, who assigns the request into a review committee. During that assignment process, we also have a process where community members can submit public comment online, and the committee receives all of the material, all of the information that was submitted by the requester, as well as all the public comment for their consideration. And then they have kind of a two-phase process. They first determine whether the title includes sensitive materials as defined by law, and that's that bright line designation that Mr. Curtis pointed out, and we implement that as expressly as outlined in the law. And if the determination is that the material does not contain sensitive materials as defined by law, then the committee determines the age appropriateness of that material. And that designation is based on language from the state model policy and the recommendation from the AG's office to use additional criteria to determine the value of the work as a whole relative to the community standard. I'll speak a little bit more about that later too. An individual has standing if they are a parent of a student in a school where the book is housed, and those are the individuals that can submit appeal requests or requests for review. The committee consists of 4 staff members. One of those staff members is a non-voting member who just is there to facilitate the discussions and deliver materials and communicate the committee's decision back to us. There's a classroom teacher, an administrator, and a librarian, as well as 4 parents. 2 parents are selected at random from a pool of parents that are appointed by community councils around the district, and 2 parents are selected at random from a lottery pool of parents where anyone in the community with standing can request to be a part of these review committees. Currently, we have, throughout this current year, we've had up to 15 active committees. We've had, given the number of requests that Superintendent Linford noted, the need to accelerate as much as possible by having multiple committees review these. Our requester who submits the request may request anonymity, and we honor that. And our policy allows our review committee members to request anonymity as well, and we honor that also. Our appeal committee, given that it's made up of 3 board members, is not an anonymous committee, and obviously our appeal decisions are made by a full board in an open public business meeting. Our policy asks us to review these between 30 and 60 days and allows if a review is going to take longer than 60 days, that we communicate that to the individual that submitted the request. Given our process right now, even with 15 active committees, our reviews are taking longer than those. On average, they're taking about 80 days for a review. We had several requests that were submitted right after HB 374 passed in the spring, and we honored those requests. And so in calculating that 80, I don't include those ones that had the span of the summer while we were developing policy and process. So it's 80 days on average for the ones that we've received since our policy was in place and we were actively pursuing this. Our appeal committee is open for 15 days following the communication of the decision. That means any member with standing in the community can submit a request for us to reconsider the decision that was made by the committee. That appeal committee meets under the direction of the board president, and they make a recommendation whether to retain the committee's decision or adjust the committee's decision in some way based on the policy. And the full board, they take that recommendation to the full board for a decision in a open board meeting. The committee, the initial review committee, the appeals committee, and the board, all of those decisions are made by a majority vote, given that we don't always attain unanimity in this perspective. I spoke a little bit about public comment as well as the standing that we have. Anybody can also submit public comment during the appeal window as well, and we'll make sure that the appeal committee gets all that information. Of note is the criteria by which we determine age level appropriateness. We know the legal criteria for sensitive materials. That was very well outlined and it's articulated clearly in the law. If a committee determines that the book does not have sensitive materials, it then moves to an age level appropriateness consideration. This language mirrors language in the USBE model policy that was developed to support districts in the implementation of our work in school libraries. And it's an interesting, there's some nuance in the language. There's vulgarity and violence. We're determining age appropriateness. We're not determining vulgarity and violence. But given that vulgarity and violence content is there, and given that the work either has some level of value to the minor, we're asked to consider the value as a whole, literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, the impact of the content of vulgarity and violence and the value of the work as a whole are placed in a balancing act with the committee's perspectives as the primary factor, and then they make an age level determination based on those two considerations. They're asked, as they make those considerations, to look at expert reviews of material, to consider their own perspectives and expertise and background, as well as to assess the community standard. And that assessment of the community standard is obviously open to their interpretation as committee members. And then there's some language in there that's from the law that's very clear. So that's basically a summary of our policy.
You go ahead. You're
Nope,
right
that's
on
it. I was
time.
just gonna-
Perfect.
I'm done.
We have questions popping now, so that's
Thank
it.
you.
You planned that presentation really well. I thought you may have had more slides. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a Christmas tree up here, so lots of questions. We're going to go to Chairman Johnson, then we'll go to Representative Lisenby, then Representative Peterson, then Representative Moss. Questions as well. But thank you for that. And again, I apologize. Go ahead, Chairman Johnson.
I just want to clarify a few things. I mean, you said that the summary from Mr. Curtis reflected your opinions. What I'm particularly concerned about is with the ban of the Bible. I just wanted to make it clear that that was not HB 374 that propagated that decision, that it wasn't based on that bill. Is that correct?
The decision about the Bible was not made because the committee did not determine that the Bible has sensitive materials as they're before.
Now, in the committee meeting on Monday, there was on the screen, and I'm sorry for the, I know there was a lot of pressure from both sides, but the superintendent wouldn't read it. And the other thing is it violates the clear line, the bright line rule. My question is why does that book still, why is it still in the library?
That book was not determined by the committee who reviewed it to violate. and that decision was not appealed. So that's why it's still in the
So
library.
you send then any, you don't simply review for violations of the Bright Line Rule before it even goes to committee? Because those materials are deemed not appropriate for school libraries, and I'm just curious, that process?
We utilize the committee to determine the merit of the claim that the content violates the Bright Line Rule.
Okay,
That's what our policy dictates, is that
So
the
are
committee
there-
assists with that determination.
It seems like to me that would be something that an attorney would review. But I'm a little bit concerned that we continue to have books in the library that violate the Bright Line, because the definition of pornography in Utah code is pretty clear in my mind. Maybe you guys differ with that. But we also have another provision in code that makes it a felony to distribute pornography to children. And I think that my opinion is that we have to be a little bit careful about Bright Line Rule violations. Even if those books are just held to the side until that's determined by your attorneys. But I'm a little bit concerned that through this process, you're actually in a possible accessory to, distribution of pornography to minors. And I don't, we haven't had a case like that so far.
If the audience, if you can just maintain, we have rules on that, so thank you. If you do agree, you're welcome to stick your thumb up in the air, though, so thanks.
So I'm just curious as to your thoughts on that.
I'll share my thoughts on it. The language in HB 3 that the designation of whether a material is sensitive be made in consultation with parents who were reflective of the school community. And so our utilization of a committee to make that decision was part of our interpretation of that language. And so as we implement our policy, I understand what you're saying, Senator, and I respect that. We believe that designation isn't made until the community makes the decision through the policy. And then at that point, we have the legal obligation to immediately remove the content, which we do.
Okay, did you have another comment on that?
Well, Madam Chair, might I be able to ask a question? I think it would help us for clarification. Are you suggesting then that we would want to have a legal counsel or a staff member supersede that direction that's in the code? Because we were really trying to meet that requirement that is in number 3 of the code.
Usually, we don't have back and
Questions.
forth.
Okay.
But we can have it be something our staff looks at and that we can have
Yeah, I
the
think that's an
senator
important
respond
thing
to.
for districts across the state to understand if or possibly a change to the code. But right now, the way it stands is that there are parents that should be engaged in making that Bright Line determination.
My understanding is that it's not just parents. Parents do have to be involved in that decision, but I get the feeling, and I don't know if this is true, I get the feeling that your legal counsel is more concerned about federal laws than they are state laws. And I'm just kind of curious as to whether the counsel actually depends on the first opinion that came out of the Attorney General's office, which the Attorney General clearly in the next opinion refuted. And so I'm just curious as to what the thoughts are.
Yeah, I'll invite Mr. Onofrio to respond to that because those 2 Attorney General memos from our state were critical.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Johnson. What I would say is that
Just state your name for the record, that'd be great.
Ben
Go ahead.
Onofrio, counsel for the school district,
Thank you.
is that both memos spoke to the issue between federal and state law, and both consider it a balance. So it's not as easy as saying, just that the state law would prevail. There are considerations on both counts that the district is trying to navigate.
So in your opinion, a violation of the Clear Line Rule constitute pornography under Utah code?
does a violation, that's the crux of the matter, Senator, is that we, or not, it does. And the state law requires us to use the parents in conjunction with our own staff to make that determination.
So you have no attorney involved in that at all? I'm just concerned about this issue of distributing pornography to minors. I think that's a serious problem.
We agree. We're doing our very best to follow the state law, which would require us to make that determination using the parents as well. Of course, we'd be open to follow any changes in the law as they come through.
So am I correct then in assuming that you're probably more concerned about the federal law than you are the state law?
Well, Senator, again, it's a balancing test between both. I wouldn't say it's one over the other. It's a dual federalism issue that requires us to maintain respect for both federal and state law. This is not a question that's been tested in 40 years in our court system, and when it was tested at the Supreme Court level, the Supreme Court was unable to come up with a majority opinion. Determination of what obscenity is a question that cuts deeply to the center of who we are as humans, and it's a very difficult determination that we appreciate the patience and consideration of this committee.
Yes, I understand that, but Utah code is very specific. It's pornography. And Utah code is very specific on the fact that distribution of pornography to minors is a felony offense. And
Senator Johnson, in response to that, our first tier is designed to respond to 374, and that is where we consider the bright line rule, but we consider it according to the code, including parents in those committees with an administrator, a principal or another administrator, a teacher, someone with expertise, and a librarian, and those folks are trained according to the code, and they do consider what we're calling the bright line rule. But the current 374 does require that we use parents. It is paramount in our policy. It's first before we consider the other federal pieces of the code. And of course, those federal pieces of the code are even considered via the state board model policy that we've tried to implement.
Thank you. Any other questions, Chairman Johnson? Okay. All right. I have a couple rounds. So can you just comment, it looked like you had over 101 books that had been challenged at some point, if I was doing quick math. Is it on a basis of first in, first out? So the first complaint jumps in the hopper. Is that then the urgency behind getting that out? Or is there the way your policy works, and I appreciate you sharing this, but how does that work?
Thank you. We receive them all the time. We've had 101. You're correct. Distribute those to committees in most of the time in batches, and for the most part it's as they come in. Oftentimes we'll have a committee that finishes a couple reviews quickly. If it's a very clear violation of the bright line rule, those reviews don't take very long. You notice the content, you recognize it's a violation of state law, and they recommend that it's removed. So that can even be a very long book that is for a decision that's made very quickly. Some books require a little bit of a closer look at the material as a whole if the content doesn't clearly violate that bright line rule. And so given that reviews take different periods of time to process, there's no expectation in our policy or even our practice that if a book is received, if a request is received before another one, that first request would have a decision before the next one.
And there isn't any time requirements on these committees?
Our policy asks for 60 days, and then we notify the individuals if it's going to be longer than that. Our average is 80 right now. Some books have taken longer, way longer. Some books we have received requests for a long time ago, and they're still pending the review from our committees, given the number that we've received.
And during that time, the book's still sitting on the shelf?
The status of the book stays the same as according to our policy right now. Mm-hmm.
I will let other committee members ask questions. Representative Lisenby? Representative, okay, go.
Thank you. And let me just, sorry, I was on the phone.
You're good.
I was actually going to have a similar line of questioning to Senator Johnson, and so Ben, your answer was interesting, right? Because really there is no federal law. There's some case law that's about 40 years old, and it was a decision by 3 judges. And that's generally what we point to when we look at the evaluation for sensitive materials after the state's bright line rule. But the states are left to determine education. The states have that authority. The federal government does not have that authority. So education is reserved to the states. The case is referring to First Amendment issues. We've made a definition in Utah code. You were shown, a material on Monday that I too would blush to read. Obviously vulgar, obviously a bright line violation. When we look at the definition in Utah code, which the good Councilman Curtis was reading earlier, and I don't even want to read that out loud, but it's clear. Human genitals in a state of sexual stimulation or arousal, acts of human masturbation, sexual intercourse or sodomy, fondling or other erotic touching of human genitals or pubic region, or fondling or other erotic touching of the human buttock or female breast. And I appreciate Superintendent Linford's comment that, an acknowledgement that your policy will definitely needs to be reevaluated, right? I agree with Senator Johnson's intimation that a bright line violation doesn't require a review committee to look at it. That can just be, and you mentioned, Board Member Mumford in the Monday meeting, that you were happy that Davis District was being so proactive at precluding materials before they ever hit the school shelves. And that you were hoping that that would then decrease the number of materials in the pipeline for review, right? This is a tool that the state has given you. This definition, this bright line rule, doesn't require a previous community standard evaluation. If the bright line rule is violated, it's out. There's no evaluation necessary. And I was just actually speaking with somebody from the AG's office to confirm my suspicions. So we can continue to have conversations like this where we go back and forth, but that's the policy question that I think all the districts really need to look at. Is this is a state decision. We've defined in Utah code what we believe is appropriate for our children. You didn't want to read what was on the board, but we're making our kids be exposed to that in a public school or in a library that's funded by taxpayer funds. None of us want that. I know you don't want that. I've had lots of conversations with you, and you've been very good to engage and to try to figure this out with us. And that's what this meeting is for. And I'm grateful we're sitting here and having this discussion. You know, if someone on the street gave a child pornographic material, they could be arrested. We should not be having pornographic material distributed to our children on school grounds. I think we can all agree on that. Now, when it comes to books that don't fit the bright line rule, absolutely. Your review process, you're sending it there, you're having it reviewed, you're reviewing it for community standards, for artistic value, for literary value, for historical value. Those are all things that are considered in the federal case law that was referred to by your council. And those are all things that we agree and we've adopted into our state code that should happen. I had a question. So you mentioned this on Monday, but I can't remember the number. But I keep wanting to call you Liz, and I apologize. Board Member Mumford, how many books have been precluded from going into school settings in an initial review process so far under that process that you mentioned on Monday?
Just by virtue of the bright line, the first prong of the test,
Yes.
Are you speaking total books?
Well, you mentioned that you were being proactive at just making sure they didn't get on the shelf.
On the shelves. So I don't think that we could articulate that number. So the way that's working, Representative Lisenby, is part of our policy. Every single media center and every librarian is tasked to create a review committee within that school. And so when the librarian's proposing a purchase of books, that committee's going through and they're trained in the same manner with the bright line rules and code and state law, because we do want to be fully compliant with this state law. And that's the tools that intake committee is using to determine library purchases. So that's it's the process. So I don't know that we could say that a committee has declined a certain number of books. I don't think we have data on that. But that's just an ongoing process in every single one of our schools, that the media center is working with those parent committees.
I see. So you're going through a committee review process as well.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'd love to talk with you further about your policy on that, and I think you'll probably see follow-up legislation in the upcoming session, but hopefully we can be proactively conversing about best practices as we move forward on that, because I do think that that will really enable your review committees to have a lighter load if those bright line rule violating materials are just prohibited from the very beginning.
Right. That was really important to us. I don't even know that that was in the model policy. I feel like our board really wanted to get ahead of the issue and realize that the selection of materials at the beginning is the most critical. Significantly different threshold for removing books from a library than determining what are appropriate purchases in each community. So we want to make sure that we're involving our community members and following the state code in that process.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your engagement, and thank you for, I got in this meeting, but it is something I think that is close to my heart, close to your hearts, and close to everybody's hearts in this room. We want our children to have age-appropriate and developmentally appropriate materials before them, and that they should have access to those in school settings. Now, yes, they can get, other materials in the community. They can access those for sure, but we shouldn't have taxpayers funding them. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Karen Peterson.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm sure you've had a month. So I appreciate you coming and spending time with us today. I do want to reiterate what Representative Lisenby said at the end, that I think we all kind of have the same goals and objectives, right? We are concerned when I think a number of us over the last year have seen, excerpts and images from books that we find disturbing, and we don't want our kids checking out from school. And so I appreciate the efforts that have gone into looking into this. So I just have kind of a couple specific questions about your policy. The first is, I guess maybe the thing that surprised me the most is the communications plan around the policy, and that kind of felt like a gap to me in the policy, as far as you have a review committee that makes a decision, but who gets to communicate that decision, and who gets to talk about what happened and why it happened, and how do we get in front of those questions that the public might have about the requests that are coming, and I guess, so that's kind of my first question is, how do we improve kind of those communication elements around the policies so that the public does have a good understanding of where we're at, and maybe what you've learned in the last little while around that?
You want me to take that one? Thank you, Representative Peterson. One of the things, our list of lessons learned in the last 2 weeks regarding communication is a very long one. And our current practice, which is based on some general policy language about issuing a statement of decision and rationale on the website. That's basically all the policy says. But our current practice is to issue a decision relative to retention or removal and certain levels of schools where that decision applies, and then also a rationale. And our current practice is to have that rationale be a general statement of reference to whether sensitive materials rule was violated or not. That process, by our estimation, given any feedback that we've received, was sufficient 59 times and insufficient the 60th time. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be adjusted. We definitely need to adjust it. The 60th review, the one we're talking about today, has showed us that we need to be very clear about how the committee votes came out, what the committee, if there were comments from committee members. We still want to retain our practice of maintaining the confidentiality of the identities of the committee members, given the sensitive nature and the very public nature of outcry around some of these decisions. And so balancing the anonymity of the individuals, we do and can and will share a lot more information about the process to give the community some assurances, number one, that we did follow our process, and number two, to kind of get a glimpse into the nature of the conversations that are happening around these works.
So one of the other concerns I've heard is, board, right, making a decision. But you're utilizing your elected board as your appeals board. So if there were changes within the statute that required the board to make the final say, the recommendation comes from the committees or something, and then I don't know how that would look exactly yet, but your board becomes the arbiter of what the final decision is. I guess I'm just curious how we would structure that with an appeals process still, so there would be a way if people disagreed with the decision.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that I've been thinking about the last couple of weeks by putting the board as the voting body on every text. It does take, we were trying to create a little bit of space for things to work through this process that's outlined in the law and the policy, and then be able to chime in. Otherwise, boards of education become book review committees as a full-time job. And we do want to have the final accountability, but as Dr. Toon indicated, many of the books are able to go through a process. And so we've talked about ways we could differentiate, maybe like some bright line committees that are focused specifically on appeals that are direct, and then books that fall within the second prong of the test might go through a different process. So we want to differentiate those in some way. I think we can also look at, our policy right now, we could simply say that every book recommendation from those advisory committees would come to a consent item with the board, and then there could be appeals that go to the board appeal committee for further review. But I think we can work through some of those things as boards. I mean, I'm excited to talk to boards across the state after a year of implementing this state law and find out what's working and not working, because I think we can bring a lot of great ideas to the table. And we've tried to be really transparent. I don't know if any of you have looked at our website. There's a real-time dashboard that reflects the review process and the dates of each of those challenges and where to make the comments. So, but we can take feedback from our community and make that, move it up front closer on the web page, or make it more clear or accessible. We've got a range of technical expertise in our community, and we want to make sure they have multiple avenues besides just that dashboard.
Thank you. Do you have any other additional
My
questions?
last question is, can you give us like your top 3 lessons learned? Because and we need to figure out what statutory changes make sense. So I would love to hear if you have 1 or 2 lessons learned you're ready to share.
I think Dr. Toon he's been keeping a running list for us as we've been talking in these meetings, so I want to make sure he gets a minute to talk. One of the lessons learned is that we have to be really cognizant of unintended consequences, whether it's our own policies or of law, because at the beginning, we all came to this with a shared interest in protecting children from sensitive materials. And then the law and our policy has been able to be, used as a politicized weapon, for lack of better words. And so I think we want to be really cautious as we make any changes to either document, whether it's the model policy of the state board or the state law, and then subsequently us as board members. And I also think a lesson we've learned on the positive side is stick to your policy and follow it through to fruition, because I genuinely believe that we protect religious liberties and freedom of speech when we treat all the challenges that come before us in an equitable way with a due process. And the second we get out of line is when we're going to be, not representing the standards that we believe in as Americans. Dr. Toon?
If we can, did that answer your question, Representative Peterson? Is that okay? All right, we just, are very ambitious in our agenda day, and so, we're gonna probably be going up to lunchtime. We're gonna go over, I know we have a lot of districts here and other presentations, but we still have a lot of questions from committee members. So committee members, if you can try to channel concise questions. This is an incredibly important topic, though. I just wanna make sure we get to everyone's questions. So we're gonna go to Representative Carol Moss.
First of all, thank you for all the work you've done on this policy, and I really respect the diligence that you have brought to this process. My question is it true that any regulations regarding censorship must be content neutral?
Do you want to speak to that? That's kind of constitutional.
Correct.
Okay, I thought I heard you say that. I just wanted to clarify that because that's review the Bible like any other book, right? And one more thing, probably have heard of it, just to clarify again. Is a book left on the shelf while it's being reviewed? Okay.
Yes.
And I'm looking again at that bright line law and that statute, and I'm still not 100% certain that you can't look at the entirety of a work, because some of those things are clear, some of the definitions that, you wouldn't want it depicted, but there are other things, like sexual intercourse. A book may mention somebody's having an affair. I was listening to NPR this morning. They were talking about the Scarlet Letter, which I used to teach. Somebody had a sexual relationship. But I mean, is anything taken into consideration in terms of the book as a whole and its literary value, and are you just taking a word or passage out of context?
In our district, according to our policy, we review it according to our best attempt at following the law in terms of having committees. The law requires parents and staff to review those. No, it's preeminent that if it violates the bright line rule, we do not consider the rest as a whole.
And that's something our staff has confirmed as well. If it violates the clear and bright line, it is taken. It's supposed to be removed. Text.
Thank you.
All right, let's go. Staff has been waiting to give a clarification real quick, and then we have 2 more in the room, and we have 1 more online question. Go ahead.
Just one thing that I failed to point out earlier, and I'll just do it briefly, is that I think we commonly, or in the community, we've colloquially referred to this as a Bible ban. And I just for the committee's clarification, the decision that the review committee made was for the district to not provide the Bible in the library, but not to ban it.
Correct.
So if Superintendent Linford and I were back at Viewmont High, everything would be fine with the Bible. If State Superintendent Dixon and I were back at Jenny P. Stewart Elementary, a student could bring a Bible could be on the school property, but it would not, under the policy currently, would not be in the library. So there's a slight distinction, though, between banning the Bible and the library not offering it.
Any more than the hundreds and hundreds of schools that don't have the Bible in the library across our state are banning it.
For the clarification, and we have additional questions from Representative Burke.
Thank you. Thank you guys again so much for being here. It was good to see you Monday and again here. People get upset by this topic, right? They get passionate about it. And one of the reasons why that is because on one hand, you have people that think that we're trying to ban, and this is what we constantly in the legislature get accused of. We're trying to ban books about people of color. We're trying to ban books about the LGBTQ community, and that's false. Absolutely, unequivocally, that narrative is false. Likewise, people are accusing you guys of wanting to ban all religious contexts. No scriptures, no books of Mormon, no Bibles, right? Again, that's false. There was a process. The process in itself, in my opinion, is very flawed. We opened a bill file on Monday so that the review committees would then become recommendation committees, right? They're going to recommend to the board books that they believe should be retained or banned. And ultimately, that decision will lay with this elected school board. That's a policy that I think will move forward. Again, the bill file is open for that. But I also have a question about a policy that I want to know your thoughts on. Is it appropriate and helpful to districts, in your opinion, to have multiple review committees? Because one of the concerns is some groups that are on one committee might differ from their opinion. So whatever book a committee goes to, it might not get a favorable recommendation from this committee, but it'll get a favorable recommendation from that committee. Do you think having multiple committees is helpful, or do you believe that it was harmful in your process with the Bible, particularly in any book?
I think it can be both, and it depends on how you define, harm. In our case, we require parents to review the materials, and to expedite that, we've created multiple committees. Having fewer committees to examine the material would slow the process, and our determination was to make sure that, as we've added committees, to make sure that the process is efficient as possible. There's no question that multiple committees have perhaps, and in this specific case, have made a determination that wouldn't align with my own views in terms of the literary, artistic, science value of the Bible. I think it's singular in the slaps value, personally. But I'm not on that committee, and our attorney will never be on one of those committees as the policy stands. And so, a democracy is messy. And there are courts with elected judges that I scratch my head at determinations that they make, and I'm grateful that there's a process of review. Whatever we do, and we welcome clarification, and we appreciate clarification in the law, because sincerely we're trying to follow the law as best we can. But yeah, it is a challenge, and we scratch our heads. But whenever democracy gets messy, I think it's important that we stay true to those principles of democracy, even when we disagree with the decisions. Even when, as you mentioned, everyone here is passionate in the way everyone on the dais is passionate. So I think even though the determinations on maybe several of these books didn't go the way that I personally would have made them go, it's important for our democratic principles to allow that to play out and allow our contrary voices to have a place at the table.
May I ask another?
Confirm just real logistics, though. I think we'll be at a place when we get through the volume of books. I'd love to see it operating more like our human sexuality standards committees, where it's a standing committee for a year that's well-trained and consistent and can operate in that avenue. And I think that's a good model of legislation that we could look at ongoing. But in the meantime, we've got a big volume that needs some resources applied.
May I ask another question?
One more, yeah.
So, what is your thoughts? This is my thoughts upon the policy as we're looking at it in administrative rules.
Turn the room back on. Okay, thank you.
How to draft this language.
Thanks. Highway
there's-
Patrol is trying to get us out of here. Go ahead.
if there's a book challenge that it falls under the bright line rule, that book should be put away, right? That's already the law. That book should be put away. However, what if there's a book challenge of the Bible or another book that doesn't fall directly under the bright line rule? What is it possible, and what are your thoughts on a policy that says during that time, that book that's being challenged gets put on the shelf, and if a child wants to read that book, they have to have a parental permission slip. That way, we're not all quickly banning books, but we're also not keeping potentially pornographic books and violent books out in front of children. What are your thoughts? Is that feasible within the libraries?
I can respond to that. I've actually penned on my list of things learned, I've actually penned a policy modification that would reflect something like that. That with the bright line rule, and I need to clarify, the Bible was challenged under the bright line rule, and so we need to be careful with this. But the idea is, if it is a bright line rule challenge, a clear bright line rule, that we maintain it until the board reviews it. I think a trigger that within the system, whether it's a kind of a committee like President Mumford discussed, where we have a committee that's agile, specially trained, specifically with, I think, some of the legal mindset that Senator Johnson's referring to, where they would quickly evaluate the bright line part of the state law and then make a determination. I should note, within our district, parents have, long before this law was created and our policy was created, parents have been able to request that their students can't check out certain books as well.
Thank you. All right, one more in the room, Representative Pulsford, then Senator Reeby. I think she still has her hand up online. Then we'll go there. I have one final, and then we'll wrap up with this. Go ahead. Oh, hold on just a moment. Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks for coming. I'll try to be brief. The committees, as you've described, are very randomly and people that just volunteer. So not necessarily have pre-existing expertise in any of this, which is probably a really good thing. But my question is, do they receive training? It would be very important that they would understand very much the bright line rule, particularly because if they see violations of that, it probably ought to be moved to a different level where it's, you know, immediately gone or has some other level. Do they understand that? Because, you know, the material that was shown on Monday, it's like, that should have probably not been in their committee.
Each committee does receive training, and we're confident that they understand the designation of how they're making a bright line rule designation and how they have the opportunity to make an age-appropriate designation after that. The outcomes from the committees still have varied, given, I think, the random nature that you referenced, Representative Pulsifer. But they do receive training, and we're confident that they understand the decision that they're making, whether they're making a decision that the community agrees with or not, is that's what's on the table today.
And perhaps if it has a violation or potential violation of bright line rule, it might need to go to a different committee that would handle it in a different way.
All right, great. Senator Reby, for questions of our presenters today.
Thank you so much for your time. I'm a little concerned because I supported this law because it has local control. I received many emails about parents concerned that they were being held to a different standard and that the state was taking over. This was very concerning to many of the people who emailed me. I struggle with one particular email that I received about a person who was the victim of a incest, and she said that, you know, these books saved her life. To have this feeling of being not alone in this world and having empathy towards people who had received some of the same treatment that she had, this saved her life. So I'm cautious about the bright line and the state taking over that definition. So my question is, would you be willing to have the state dictate which books are on your shelves in your district? And my second question that is, how much time has spent on this, these review committees? This was the other trending question I had in all my emails, was that, you know, our kids are not reading at grade level, our students are struggling with social emotional issues, and we are spending a lot of time on 30 books. I agree, I do not want pornography on any shelf whatsoever, but I think parents are the first and foremost in charge of their kids, and they should be, you know, watching what their kids read. So those are my two questions with those two caveats. Thank you.
Did you get those two questions? Okay. Superintendent, we know you have to go, so that's all right. And thank you for being here today. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Reby. In terms of the time, it's an immense amount of time. We haven't attempted to quantify that, but it's many hours, especially on those designations that follow after the Bright Line rule is determined to not apply. The books read the committees read the books as a whole and consider them heavily. So while I can't quantify that, it is an incredible time commitment. It's one that we're willing to invest in, though, in order to assure that we have the right kinds of materials in front of our students. And then the question of whether how we would feel about a state designation, maybe I'll defer to President Mumford on that one. I have my own feelings. Do you have thoughts on that, a state designation? Okay, my thoughts on that are that we have a process that's in place, and it's imperfect, and it's brand new, and it's local. And my personal recommendation would be to maybe let's make some adjustments and tweaks and provide whatever state guidance the legislature has to inform that process, but let's keep those decisions local. That would be my recommendation.
All right, thank you for that. We appreciate that. Thank you, Senator Reby. All right, just one quick, well, I think the anonymity piece has come up. Can I just ask real quick, was that Javis's policy? That wasn't directed from USB's rule, right?
Correct. My understanding is and I don't have the USB model in front of me, they directed an anonymity for the claimant or
Oh,
challenger.
correct, but not for the actual committee.
We strongly felt, and we went back and forth about what would be appropriate. We felt because our board, who is an open and elected body, would have the final appeal challenge opportunity, we wanted to protect the anonymity of those participants because it could become really polarized from either side. You could end up on a review committee that a book your neighbor challenged or something. And we don't want our parent volunteers to become targets. We want them to be able to operate and do that in a safe place where they can have robust discussions and get to a good conclusion.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. That will conclude questions for this, and thank you for being here. We'll wrap up that portion of it. So, great. Okay. It looks like we do have a motion from a committee member, Representative Birkeland.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. If it's appropriate, I would like to recommend that we motion that we open a committee bill file on this issue.
That motion is in order. Would you like to speak to it?
Well, I think there's, administrative rules did open a bill file, but it's ultimately going to come to education anyway, and to have this committee's input on what that bill file looks like. I think, obviously, for me, it's a priority that we ensure that the decision ultimately lies with the elected school board members, as well as making sure that while the book is under review, that it's accessible, but only with parental permission for them to review it. Things like that, and to gather that input from this committee and to continue to work through this issue, I think would be valuable.
Thank you. I appreciate that motion on the table. It is in order. Brief and quick discussion of that motion. Chairman Johnson?
I would like to see, and this is something we can talk about as a committee, but I would like to see some type of penalties put in this. It seems like we have some districts that are more afraid about what, some Supreme Court decision was many, many years ago than they are with the state law, especially with respect to the bright line rules, so.
Thank you. Senator Reeby, discussion of the motion?
Yes, I would like to know if the motion is going to provide further restrictions. Is it going to take it out of the panels? I mean, I just don't want it to be more
The
cumbersome
motion
than
on
it
the
already is.
table, the motion on the table is just to open a bill file on this issue.
Okay,
That's
thank
it.
you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion of the motion, I'll put that up for a vote, and we do have to do a roll call vote because there are people on the line. I'm looking at staff to make sure. Yes, okay, so be prepared. All those in favor of the motion to open a committee bill file on this issue, roll call vote. And please turn your cameras on. It looks like everyone's got them on. Senator Fillmore.
Aye.
Senator Grover.
Aye.
Senator Reeby.
Aye.
Representative Birkeland.
Yes.
Representative Clancy. Representative Johnson.
Yes.
Representative Lisenby. Representative Lund. Representative Karen Peterson. Representative Val Peterson. Representative Pulsifer. Representative Wheatley. Senator Johnson.
Yes.
Chair Perucci. Yes. All right, that is unanimous, and we have a committee bill file open. Thank you, committee members, for your work on that. Thank you as well for the time that was spent on that. It's an incredibly important issue. We're going to jump back into the agenda, and we'll do a little bit of a reset again. We have Jordan School District here, and I really appreciate that they've brought a teacher and a parent, and I'm excited for your presentation. And again, we're jumping back to the conversation around curriculum transparency in general and parent engagement and access for the committee to have that in mind. Again, for those in the room, we will have public comment at the very end, and we will do that if we need to go over. And so if we can just ask that everyone shaves their presentations down by 4 minutes, that might help. But the time is yours, and if you can just introduce yourselves when you do speak, and if you represent anyone for the record, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Tracy Miller. I'm president of the Board of Education for Jordan School District. We have Dr. Anthony Godfrey, our superintendent, and we're also pleased today to have a teacher, Amy Rizzuto, with us, a teacher at Aspen Elementary, and Brittany Housel, who is a parent in our district. And we appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And again, as Representative Perucci says, switching gears back to the topic of curriculum transparency. This issue is important to my board. We have worked really hard to increase transparency and engage parents within our district. Our teachers have also worked hard to be transparent and to engage parents. Our teachers are professionals and they understand that one of the greatest determinants of student success is having engaged parents. And as Representative Moss mentioned earlier about wanting to know and wanting to be able to help their kids, our teachers welcome that and welcome parents who are able to help have student learning continue at home. They also develop positive working relationships with students or with parents of students. And they have a lot of tools and resources these days, as you heard previously, to help communicate and share with parents. And our teachers do a fantastic job. So I'm really glad this committee is taking the time over the interim to find out what our districts are doing. We think that there is a strong desire on everyone's part to find the right balance on this issue. So I'm going to start with policy. As a board member, we set policy for the district. And when Jordan School Board first started hearing concerns about curriculum transparency from our parents, and also the legislature started discussing that, we looked at our policy. We have a policy governing this issue that was first created in 1969. Now it's been revised several times through the years, but a lot has changed. And so the further we dug into the policy, the more we realized it needed some significant revisions. So the policy that we started on was D200, philosophy of instruction, and then we also had a controversial issues policy that many of you have heard about. And we embarked on a year-long process for that revision. In the end, ended up combining the two policies because we wanted to make it clear and have one place where people could go to. And our goal is to provide greater emphasis of parents' roles and responsibilities so that they know what expectations are. We wanted to provide greater clarity for our teachers. And then the other part of this was to pull together all the relevant Utah Code and Utah State Board rules and have them in one policy with links to them. And as we were going through deciding like how to word things in the policy, and we were having debates on, big wordsmithing debate, we fell back on Utah Code every time. Let's just pull the language out of code and use that within our policy. So that was an important part of this policy revision. The process, like I said, was almost a year-long process. And we took public comment many times within our board meeting. We received a lot of emails. When we had a really good draft that was ready to go, we emailed it to every parent in our district and set up a process for them to email feedback to the board on that. We also held an open house in which we invited all the parents in our district to that. And that was a really good format because in public comment, we listened to comment, but in the open house, we were able to dialogue and have conversations with our community about this policy. Every point along the way where we received feedback, we made changes to the policy. So that feedback really did shape what was in our policy. And because of that lengthy process, we feel like we came to a really good spot and a really good balance with that policy. It was even on our agenda to be voted on, the final one, at one point in time, and someone stood up in public comment and said something, and we tabled it and brought it back the next month. So we worked really hard to be very responsive and to reach out to all of our community and come up with a good policy with good balance. So here's a couple of just important features of the policy, and there's a lot in it, but here's just a few key things that we added. The first was that we wanted to emphasize that we're partner with parents, and parents play the primary role in teaching or in educating their children. Education is a shared responsibility among students, parents, teachers, school administrators, and support staff. One thing we added was that teachers notify parents or guardians of guest speakers invited into the classroom. Our parents have a lot of trust in teachers and have a great relationship with them, but they may not always know the guest speakers, so we wanted to make sure that that notification was given. We also emphasized a line that says instruction cannot include the teacher's personal political affiliations or viewpoints, and then added language that parents may request and receive an alternate assignment as outlined in Utah Code. So those are just a few of the highlights of that policy. And then the last part of the policy is a process for reporting and resolving concerns. And the first part of that policy is we really encourage parents to go to the teacher first and have that discussion with the teacher. Our teachers, welcome that interaction and welcome the opportunity to talk about what they're learning in class. I will turn the time now to Dr. Godfrey to talk more about that process and how the policy was implemented. We gave specific instruction that we wanted every teacher trained on the policy. So Dr. Godfrey.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. When that policy was put into place, the philosophy of instruction policy, we provided a 30-minute training to all teachers that was conducted by the principal but recorded by our teaching and learning department to be sure that teachers were aware of the new policy. This provides teachers the support and flexibility that they need in the classroom while being mindful of the expectations in interactions with parents and in maintaining transparency. Just a couple of points from that training. One, remember that parents are a very important partner in the education process. Two, be as transparent as possible with the parents so that they have the opportunity to be a part of the process. And three, communication is essential. Let parents, guardians know frequently what is happening in your classrooms and school so they can take part in this partnership. In addition to that training, then we also have ways for parents to communicate concerns that they may have about anything that's happening in the school generally or in their classroom. Those concerns are one click away from our main page, or that concern reporting page is one click away from our main page, where they can access our district hotline, the state hotline. They can report any discrimination, make a grammar request. And I also have my own personal page where folks can contact me. It's called my SOS page, SOS for Superintendent of Schools, and SOS because I want to help. And there's a way for parents and employees to interact with me anonymously. So they can not only submit something anonymously, but we can also interact anonymously. We've set that up through Qualtrics so that we can actually have a dialogue that way. So that's very important to me, to be able to implement the policies put in place by the board so thoughtfully with that public engagement, make sure everyone's trained so that everyone understands the expectations. That email, when we were working on that open house, was actually sent to all parents. So all parents this year received notification of the policy and the discussions around it. So all of that information is really important for us to have out there very clearly. And then we just work to continue to provide that teacher and parent transparency, so as others have indicated, we can focus on the day-to-day learning that's so important in the classroom. To that end, we've invited a teacher and parent from our district to give you a little bit of their perspective, and we'll switch places with them now.
Ooh, sorry, I'm a little nervous.
Good. Go ahead and just state your name for the record. That'd be great.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am Amy Rizzuto. I am a second grade teacher at Aspen Elementary, and I am very happy to be given the opportunity to represent the teachers of Jordan School District in regard to this issue of transparency. I feel very strongly that I am a teammate in educating the children that I am blessed to teach. My teammates are my principal, my superintendent, and most importantly, my students' parents. And I try and strive to make sure that the parents are consistently aware of this. Part of the way I do that is at back to school night, I make sure that I have my Canvas page projected, and it's part of a scavenger hunt that students go through with their parents so that parents can get registered for observing my Canvas page to see everything that their students are going to be doing in class. Additionally, I send frequent emails to parents. I have been known to text a parent when necessary for anything that might have come up, any type of emergency. Additionally, just to send them a note of, look at what your kid did today. How incredible were they today, so that they can celebrate in all the successes. I truly feel that if the first time a parent is hearing from me is at parent-teacher conferences or because of a negative behavior, then I have not done a great job of keeping parents informed of what's going on in the classroom, because every day there are successes that they should be aware of so that they can celebrate that with their students. Additionally, in that email, I send a weekly email letting them know of everything that we're going to be going over in the classroom. I will send resources if needed, and give them talking points to ask their kids about at home. What did they think about this lesson? So that it's more than just, hey, Johnny, what did you do at school today? And it's not the repetitive, oh, you know, Mom, same old thing. Additionally, in my Canvas page, is this? Oh, so that's just an example email that was sent out in, I think, May, when we had a few days left of school. Just kind of going over important dates that were coming up for parents to be aware of. And then on the right is my Canvas homepage. And it has directions for the parents for what the buttons will do when they press them, where they can find different information. In the daily slides, that is a presentation that I run off of in my classroom, and it has links to all of the resources that I'm using within that. My students have access to that, and the parents have access to that. And it's projected for the whole week so that they can go on whatever day of the week to see what it is we're learning. It also has like the silly little activities that we might be doing when their lunch breaks are, and that type of situation. At the bottom, there's a parent resources button, and that is where I have links for parents to be able to access through the district, all of our district supports that they have for parents, as well as our school supports. How to reach me. Typically, they reach me through email, or occasionally I'll set up a social media page if every student's parents have signed the media release. And that has been super successful with just bringing parents into the classroom, because I can do a quick Instagram story, for example, and they're seeing in real time some of the things their students are doing, and the kids get to interact a little bit. Let's see. I think that was, additionally, I'm part of the social studies curriculum for the new social studies standards. And one of the things that we're doing with making the new lesson plans for those social studies standards, which will be posted on UEN, I believe, next year, we've included a letter at the end of every lesson that includes resources for the parents to look at, and an invitation to ask them to talk to their families about their values in regards to the specific thing that we're teaching, so that there's background knowledge available to the student prior to a lesson, as well as talking points for the families to be able to discuss what their values are in regards to all of the things that we're teaching in the classroom.
Awesome. Thank you, Mrs. Rizzuto. Is it Rizzuto?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I have a 4-year-old. I wish I could just request through the district that you would be his teacher in 2nd grade. Can you tell me, have you taught other grades, or is 2nd grade primarily what you've taught so far?
I've also taught 3rd grade.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you. This is phenomenal. And as a parent with him in preschool, I love getting emails and texts from the teacher that, and this is really great to see. And I think helps shed some light on the interaction that's happening between teachers and parents. And we know the 2 most important factors in a child's success in education is a great teacher and parent engagement. And so you are currently engaged in that, and I really appreciate it. We'll shift to is this the parent that you guys, okay, come on in and go ahead and state your name for
Madam
the
Chair,
record.
my name is Brittany Housel. I'm a parent in the Jordan School District. And my child and our family had the honor to have Miss Rizzuto as Calvin's teacher for the last half of the year. And as a parent, I'm really 100% hands down want a teacher who communicates. I prefer communication weekly whenever my child needs it. And as a special, my child has special needs, and for a while this year, he was struggling so much that she was communicating with us daily, which I appreciated. Gave me a rundown of his entire day, his behaviors, why he might have done what he did, how she resolved it, and it meant a lot to me that she was so hands-on with my child's care and education. And by the end of the year, I feel like we saw a lot of improvement in his behaviors, and his education has come a long way. I feel like, sadly, it's, for me, I wish she could stay with him for his entire career, education career, but because I feel like she's the exception and not the standard, unfortunately. Because communication, at least from my point of view as a parent, is, if I know what my child is doing daily, I mean, in her email, she would put what the rundown of their day was going to be, or their schedule, and just as a whole, I feel like the elementary school that we attend in Jordan School District has been very transparent, and the administration has been very helpful and open when I had emotional concerns. And I was very passionate about a couple things that I kept pushing for that I felt like weren't happening, and we were able to resolve them with the special ed department and the administration, and I just feel like he ended his year successfully, and I'm grateful for that transparency and that communication where I feel like my needs were met, my child's needs were met, and that they welcomed us and wanted us within the school system.
Thank you, Brittany. I appreciate that. And it sounds like your kids are lucky to have you as a parent as well. So we have a superstar team here. Something you said, and this could be for Mrs. Rizzuto or for other members of the committee. Excuse me here. Do you have more in your presentation? I don't want to cut you off. Okay, fantastic. So you made the comment, I feel like, and I've even had people text me, Miss Rizzuto's awesome. So you're clearly a fan club, and that's fantastic. How is it, and I think this level of communication is so proactive to where a parent would feel comfortable to say, hey, today my student came home and shared a story, seemed a little, trying to see what actually happened, and they'd have that relationship with you. What is the district policy in place on what you recommend for parent-teacher communication? Because obviously this is an amazing standard and would love to replicate it. But tell me what the bare minimum is for teachers that they should be doing, and then we have superstars who go above and beyond.
So we don't have a specific policy because there's a lot of variations, a lot
Yeah,
of
for
different
sure.
classes and stuff. But we have provided training and procedure. So Dr. Godfrey, if you want to address that.
You can just move those mics. Yeah, go ahead.
We don't have a requirement that there's a specific frequency of communication, but it's not atypical to receive weekly information from a teacher and to have those lines of communication open. Canvas does make that very easy as well. And observe is the exact term that's used on the website as well, that parents are able to observe the class. So, there's a lot of interaction that's available, and those regular communications do come from many of our teachers, but they're not absolutely required.
Gotcha. Appreciate that
May
clarification.
I address
Yeah,
that
go
as well,
ahead.
Madam Chair? So I can't speak for other schools, but in my school, we have an expectation that we will reach out to every single child's parent within the first couple of months of school to let them know some successes that they've seen, and then anytime we need to. I haven't been informed of any specific requirement, but I could also speak as a parent. I have 3 children in the Jordan School District, and my middle school children, I regularly get emails from their teachers as well, informing me of what they're going over in class, and my daughter's health teacher in particular consistently sends resources for me to review and talking points to have with them on various subjects that they're going to be talking about in school. So as far as a specific requirement, I haven't been given one, but I know that all the teachers in the district are working hard to make sure they're getting consistent communication.
And really quick, when you say there's an expectation to reach out in the first few months, I think it's fantastic. Is that coming from the principal, from the school administration, then, that they're strongly encouraging that?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's
Okay.
correct.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Tracy.
And I will speak as a parent of a high schooler, that I've also heard from every teacher. And at the high school level, it's not the fun, cute newsletters anymore that we got in elementary, but every teacher that my children have had have reached out at some point in time and sent home information and kept the communication lines open.
Thank you, I appreciate that. We do have a question from Representative Clancy.
Thank you, and this would be probably best suited for Mr. Superintendent, but my understanding with the current, kind of shifting back to our previous discussion, but specifically as it relates to Jordan School District, my understanding is that your policy right now requires a challenge even if something violates the bright line rule. Is that your understanding of how that fits in the code, or is that something that was came about from your discussions and committee meetings?
So we're pivoting now to sensitive materials. That came, when we developed the policy, and that comes from the board with a lot of public input, as she described on our D200 policy as well. There were a number of sources, of course, applicable laws, and there was already reference to letters from the Attorney General's office. The second letter from the Attorney General himself was pivotal in the creation of our policy as well. So that was really the focus, and we do have committees that make that determination.
That's really helpful, just as we talk about, different roles of government and how it's being viewed at your level. And then this last question I have is just my observation is it would seem to be helpful if I was in your shoes, if there was a state directive. I know last year it came in the I think it was House Bill 464. It was a Representative Ivory, and it essentially created a blanket policy in saying, hey, if Park City school districts find that a book violates the Bright Line rule, let's just send a message out and help the other school districts identify those gaps. And so, would you find that effective from your position as an administrator when it comes to sensitive materials to have that directive across the state, that kind of bandwidth, or do you feel differently about that?
There's always this balance between local control and clarity at the state level. So I think that's something that we just have to continue to work together to achieve.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Listenby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, and to Representative Clancy's question, that's an excellent question. I've actually had discussions with the state board on that. The policy in 464 was a little more prescriptive, but if there's just an informational piece at the state level that says these are the books in this district that have been removed so that other districts can get on and look at those and see and be aware, that could be very helpful. So I agree, and that's something we're working on.
Thank you. I do have a question. In addition, can you just tell me, I know you're here, we're talking about curriculum transparency, parent engagement, because we also have sensitive materials on the agenda. Do you know how many books that have been challenged in Jordan School District and how many have been removed?
39 have been challenged, 17 have been removed.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Awesome. Well, thank you again for taking the time to be here today. We, as I mentioned, we reviewed over
I have a
60.
question.
Oh, excuse me, Senator Reeby does a question. So, let me just finish this. We reviewed over 60 bills. And again, so often, so I'll tell you, I graduated high school in 2010, and everything wasn't online at that point. And so I think it's helpful for us to see what it looks like as a parent now engaging with teachers. Senator Reeby.
Thank
Okay.
you, Madam Chair. I once again caution us about creating a state list of books that are taken off the shelf. I really do support this legislation only if it has local control. My question is that I work in 2 schools, and I also have my own children go to 2 schools, 3 until I graduated. And we have, I can probably name 15 platforms off the top of my head that teachers have used to get in touch with me. My concern is that, as Chairwoman Brucci said, that the best indicator of success is the relationship between schools and parents and their engagement. But unfortunately, some of these tools don't always have translations in them and have the ability for people who don't have devices or email or speak the language or even read at grade level read our scholarly language in our schools. So what kind of steps could we make? And thank you for the work you've done. You're tremendous. And there are so many great teachers out there finding so many different ways to reach out to all of our students. I have met so many wonderful teachers. But what can we do as a state to provide a platform that everyone can use consistently across the state? Or what can we do as districts to make sure that we are meeting the needs of some of our more struggling parents who are coming from refugee situations or immigration statuses, or maybe just not as reading proficient as some of our teachers are? Because I think that we have an understanding of what we think is acceptable when we communicate with people, but we're not always really cognizant of what people need when they receive that information from schools. So do you have any thoughts about that question?
Thank you. As a district, we've been looking at products that do provide the type of services you've described that would facilitate and streamline teacher and parent communication. There's one on the state contract that translates texts into a long list of languages, and one of the challenges we face is, as was indicated by another district, that sometimes educators using a wide range of different products, and as you said, maybe 15 different apps. This would streamline things into one app, and it goes right to your text messaging, and parents can control what time of day they would receive those messages, and it can be translated into a long list of languages, as I said, so that it really increases the access and streamlines it, makes it easier. So we're looking at some of those products that may be able to provide what you've described.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, one final question, Representative Lisenby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. And it's not really a question, but just a suggestion. As you continue to review your sensitive materials policy, I would encourage you to be more proactive at removing materials that fall under the definition of our Bright Line Rule 1227 of pornography. That, I think, is maybe a gap in your policy currently, where you only review or you only review materials after they've been challenged. Is my understanding, is that correct? So being more proactive would be wise, in my opinion, just based on the case law and the other code regarding distribution of pornography to minors. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. All right, next up we've got on the agenda Washington School District. After Washington School District will be Granite School District, and then we will do public comment. So hang tight, committee members. Thank you. Oh, and the Utah State Board of Education is here too. Fantastic. Okay, so let me have Washington. Let me get Washington and Granite, and then we'll have you guys wrap us up, okay? And then we'll do public comment. Okay, thank you so much. And we're shifting gears here. They're gonna Superintendent Bergeson. Thank you for coming. And if you'll introduce your co-presenters today, and they'll be presenting on the process and progress they have for implementing sensitive material requirements. If you can just also, in front-loading information, we'd be curious to know how many books you have had challenged and how many removed. So thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Chair Prucci. We appreciate the opportunity to be here with this group, appreciate hearing what the other districts have had to say before. Let me introduce you. I have with us here today, I have with me Board Member Terry Hutchinson, who has been instrumental and very involved in our sensitive materials work as a district and represents the school board. Also with me is Jeremy Cox, who is our technology director and who has been our major person within our district given the assignment to work on sensitive materials, and has also worked very closely with legislators from Representative Ivory as well as Walters and I believe even Fillmore to some extent. Not as much. Okay. Anyway, we would first like to just thank you for the work that you do as legislators. We appreciate the session that we just passed, even though it was challenging in many respects. We as districts certainly represent the funding and the support that has been given to public education, and we're grateful for it. It allows us to move forward, and we appreciate the dialogue and collaboration that we have on key issues, and look forward to that as we move forward with issues such as the earmark and a funding framework and things of that nature. As we work on our policy and sensitive materials, you're going to get a little bit of a different look from us, and I hope that what you would understand and respect, and I think we all need to, as has been stated by other superintendents, board members, parents, and so forth, is the complication when we have legislation of trying to implement the various laws, codes, interpretations of those laws as we work through it. It's a dynamic process, and one that we try and be very collaborative with, especially with parents, our constituents that we're working with in our communities. And the thing that we always want to be known as and fall back on is making decisions on the basis of what's best for kids. If we keep that in mind, I don't think we can err too far. That being said, I'm going to turn the time over to Jeremy Cox, who is going to explain our process and where we currently stand relative to this process. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this committee at this time. Our story started back in 10 of 2021 when we had a parent bring to our attention 2 materials that they felt were inappropriate for school. At that time, we actually formed a committee, met, decided to have those materials removed. And then later, so in December, we removed those materials, and then in February, we were notified that that we had used the wrong policy, and we actually didn't have a policy that really applied for materials within the libraries. The policy that we'd used was for curriculum, and thus we returned those materials, and we began immediately to work on policy regarding that in February of 2022. The next month, House Bill 374 passed, and then we had our policy passed 2 months later that addressed sensitive materials within schools. Since that time, to answer your first question, we've had 69 complaints, informal complaints, and we've had 1 formal complaint, and I'll explain the difference with those. But from those informal complaints, we've had 52 titles or materials removed for bright line violations. In that time period, as we've been working through that, we also have been working on getting our curriculum policy passed, which we just passed this month, just a couple of weeks ago. And I don't know, can you see what's on my screen? Is it showing?
Thank you, yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
It worked, thank you.
Good, I'm glad to hear it, because we can't see it up here.
Oh, you can't? It's not on those monitors?
Yeah, but they're behind me, so.
All right, well, I feel bad for those
know what it
online.
says.
Okay, we'll
Yeah.
make sure we get it posted.
So in our policy, we allow for what we call an informal complaint and a formal challenge. And you can see this flow chart here, which is just a little bit complicated. But essentially what happens is if we have someone come to us and say that there is a material that potentially has a problem, the very first thing we do is we look at it. We look at the areas that they're concerned with. We identify if any of those areas meet Brightline.
When you say we, is it your librarian? Is it your principal? Is it you? Who does that?
So the very first step it happens is whoever receives that complaint. In our process, it says to go to the librarian. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes it comes directly to me.
Okay.
But what happens is the individual who receives that complaint immediately looks at it and says, based on the training they've received, does it meet Brightline? And you can notice in that chart, we kind of identify what Brightline is. We even have some helper questions that help them understand it a little bit better. In fact, maybe that might help just a little bit. But as we go through that process, if they agree that it meets Brightline or think that it might meet Brightline, then we have them send an email out to the district leadership. When that happens, and if we agree with that, we have the material held throughout the district. So the material is actually taken temporarily off the shelves, not a permanent removal, but it's held because we believe it meets Brightline while we wait to obtain a copy of the material so we can read it in context. Once we identify that it has met Brightline, then we remove it at that point without actually a formal committee or review process. That definition, the way we define that actually goes through my office, and the director I have who is over media starts that process and I finish it. If the parent is not happy with the decision in that regards, then they have the opportunity to file a formal complaint. And that formal complaint or that formal challenge goes through a Form 944 in which we convene a committee. Now, interesting enough, we have had absolutely no formal challenges until the end of this school year. And so we've dealt with every issue with an informal complaint. And so, and we've been able to work through all those Brightline concerns very, very effectively. And we had one formal complaint at the end of this last school year, and we are working through the committee process right now.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I would like to speak on behalf of our board because when this
Can you
process...
just for the record state your name?
My name is Terry Hutchinson.
Thank you,
I'm a board
Terry.
member.
Yeah.
Our board received these complaints back in October of 2021. We removed them, and then, of course, we were informed that the process was flawed. It was a pretty intense decision on our part whether to put it back and take the legal consequences or to revamp our policy and in light of case law and other things. In meeting with Representative Ivory, House Bill 374 was passed directly with our school district support. Superintendent Bergeson appeared before the committee to testify in support of it. That law was specifically designed, as Representative Lisenby said, to give us a tool to enable us to take care of these things because, in my opinion, the PICO decision ever since 1975 has been abused to just say, okay, if it's in the library, you have to treat it this way. If it's in the curriculum, you have to treat it this way. We now have specific state definitions, thanks to the legislature, which give us the tools to do effectively what we have been able to do. I'd just clarify one of the things that Mr. Cox said, and that was there is a process even in the informal removals. So when they come out, it's not that they don't have any due process. It's that this is just a different process. And the process is very streamlined. The process is very bright line, which after listening to the other school districts testify about that, I believe that we're meeting the legislative intent of the bright line rule, as Senator Johnson, as Representative Lisenby, Representative Birkeland have all indicated. And so I would also indicate that occasionally some of these reviews have come to my attention, and in informal conversations with Mr. Cox about them, I have not agreed with the decision to put some of the books back. That verifies the process, because as a school board member, I do not have the influence over those decisions as completely as might be accused. Therefore, the processes work, the processes are independent, and it's those processes that will enable us to withstand, in my opinion, any legal challenge that comes up. And so we're very grateful for what the legislature has done to this point.
Thank you.
You know, I would just add, it's a work in progress. It's the way that we've interpreted it, the way other districts have interpreted it. We always appreciate local control. We even understand within a school district, we'd like all of our schools to be as consistent, as good as the next. It isn't as easy as that, and there's a balance between autonomy and allowing some local control and input and buy-in and moving forward. We're working as best we can. I believe all districts are. We appreciate patience as we go through this process without a lot of punitive aspects other than just let us move forward. I think there are some things that can be dealt with on a state level, even federal level. But at the end of the day, the old adage, the problem is best solved closest to where the problem exists, is the best practice.
Thank you, Superintendent. Additional questions from the committee, and I'm going to have staff, if they can bring your, or I don't know if that's you, do you mind bringing that infographic up of your process real quick? I just want to, why we have so many districts up here today, other than having an ambitious schedule, is we want to be able to compare. So to be clear, in Washington School District, if there is a bright line violation that is viewed when it first comes to you, you pull it off the shelf.
Correct. If we ascertain and look at the evidence as we have it, and we agree that this looks like it could be a bright line violation, then we immediately have it pulled throughout the district.
And when you pull it, is that permanent, or are you saying that you're pulling it while it's being reviewed?
So we pull it while it's being reviewed, and there isn't a review committee per se that does that. What happens is we get a copy of that book and we actually read that section, because sometimes we get little snippets, and sometimes they're taken out of context. And so we're not actually trying to compare the material as a whole. We're just looking at context for what is actually happening. And if we agree that at that point it does meet Brightline, then it's pulled permanently.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that clarification. We have a couple of questions from the committee. Representative Lisenby?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can't tell you how refreshing your slides are. Amazing work. Thank you. This is what I was talking about earlier. This is exactly what legislative intent was. This is what our policy directs, and clearly you've gotten it, and just thank you. Thank you for your work. Amazing work. I would love to have your slides as part of the meeting materials as well. We have Jordan's and Davis, but we don't have yours. So that's just a request from me. I would love to have your slides. Thank you. Again, I do want to say, I know there's tremendous concern for overreaching state government on local control. I would say that I think this meeting has been very helpful to identify some clarifications that are needed so that we can support our locals in abiding by state law. So hopefully that's the, hopefully you feel that we are trying to be supportive of our districts following the law and not overreaching and being excessively punitive.
I would add to that, just Representative Lisenby, that as we have dealt with this kind of on our own and then dealt with it with the support of law, it has been helpful to have the support of law on our side. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Representative Karen Peterson.
Thank you. So Superintendent Bergeson, this is like your last hurrah, right? I mean, he retires July 1st, if you guys don't know. Larry's about done, so appreciate your service, and thanks for what you've done. I mean, I definitely think Washington School District has had a kind of a reputation of being proactive on this issue, and I appreciate your work. So I just have two questions for you. The law does require a parental involvement component. So I guess I want to understand on this slide, where do parents fit in?
That's a great question. So in the event, so if you look at the end of this chart where it says that they submit that Form 944 to the District Media Review Committee Chair, what happens at that point is, then at that point we're going to decide if it meets the sensitive material criteria other than Brightline, right? So we're going to look through the rest of the law, and that law says that we have to have parental involvement. So as we form that committee, in fact, I can bring up our policy right here. The members of that committee, it consists of an assistant superintendent or director, who's the chair, 2 certified media center librarians, the school media center librarian who's responsible for material, 3 parents, 1 principal or assistant, and 1 school counselor, school psychologist, or school social worker.
That's a good clarification. Thank you. I just wanted to understand where that part was met. And then here's my second question.
Yeah.
If the law,
Excuse me, can I just interrupt? It is our interpretation that the bright line definition doesn't really require that level of parental involvement under the statute. And that's why our policy is significantly different than other districts who presented today.
Right, that's helpful. Okay, here's my second question. If the law were to change and it would require that the boards ratify the decisions that are, right now are not being made at the board level in your district, I just kind of would like your response to, board member, I didn't catch your name, I apologize, but, I mean, you said I shouldn't really be part of that process, and we're saying maybe you're going to be.
Let me just say that as a board member, and I believe a previous board member, board president also indicated this, we're ultimately responsible as the board. But I can tell you that this is so time-consuming for boards. I frankly am surprised at the appeal process by the Davis School District that they had up here, because while I'm happy to be politically responsible for any decision that we make, I ultimately, it's local control, and the local control is because I'm responsible to voters who are in my neighborhood. But the time that it takes to review this material at the level it needs to for a serious consideration, particularly in the totality, and I'm not talking about the bright line rules, I'm talking about any of these regular challenges, is incredible. Just the discussion about the bright line rule with 3 or 4 titles last December that I was engaged in informally with Mr. Cox was about an hour and a half of my time. And that doesn't include the reading of the material. I'm a pretty fast reader. I do a daily thing on the radio about books, but it's something that it really requires time. And so for the board to be heavily involved in that, and perhaps there were suggestions about a ratification or something like that, maybe there's something that could be done with legislation, but the time constraint on board members in particular, if that were to come from the state level, would be something that I would have a very hard time supporting from a practical standpoint, not a political or responsibility standpoint, because the time requirements for board members are growing.
Thank you. One final question from Chairman Johnson.
One thing looking at your chart, it's my understanding, and I'm going to have Michael clarify this, it's my understanding that the parent should be involved in that very first decision as well. Am I interpreting that right?
Hold on, Mike, there you go.
Yeah, so the statute, I'll just read it. The statute says an LEA shall include parents who are reflective of the members of the school's community when determining if an instructional material is sensitive material. So there's no distinction there in the parent involvement requirement as to whether we're talking bright line or subjective balancing test or anything like that. The parents have to be involved in determining if a material is sensitive material.
Representative Lizenby was going to respond. Is that okay? Go ahead, Carrie, Representative Lizenby.
Sorry. Thank you. So I actually identified that section. It's in 53G 10103 sub 3. And it just says, when determining if an instructional material is sensitive material, the LEA shall include parents who are reflective of the members of the school's community. However, and this is interesting, right? I actually pulled out a state board member and had a conversation about this in the middle of this meeting because I think it's rather unclear, but we could definitely clarify that, and that was to my comment about supporting our LEAs and following the law and the legislative intent. So just adding after that for clarification, unless it violates the 1227 language, then that would not, we don't, so in other words, we don't need parents to weigh in on whether something is pornographic or not. It's an objective measure that we as a state legislature have inserted into code. So, but when there are questions and it's not bright line, then absolutely we need parental involvement. And I believe that was original legislative intent, and that was what was understood as well from.
Maybe that's something that we can clarify in the open bill file.
I sent it to our House chair and with the suggestion that we clarify that in the bill.
And that's what, Mike, you're saying we would need to.
Yeah,
Because that seems to be the discrepancy in all these presentations, so.
And if I may, just to be fair, it just says to include parents, right?
Right.
So it doesn't say that you have to have a committee that includes parents or something like that, so.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
But yeah.
All right, seeing no further clarifying questions, we appreciate you making the trip up and presenting to our committee today. Thank you so much, and we'll get your slides, but we'll make sure he gets those from you guys.
We'll make
Thank
sure
you.
we get those to you. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you very much. All right, next up is Granite School District. I know they didn't think we were gonna get to them, but we got to them. And then after, we will jump to briefly USBE, and then we will have public comment. There are, I believe the last, they had checked, there were 11 individuals. Okay, so, great. If you have flyers, go ahead and have those right here. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Rich Nye, Superintendent of the Granite School District. With me, I have Nicole McDermott. She's our Board President, and Chief of Staff Ben Horsley. We appreciate the opportunity to talk through sensitive materials and the implementation of it in the Granite School District. I just want to make it clear that we in the Granite School District feel that our role is to partner with parents to raise children. They trust us with their children. That is something that we never take lightly, and certainly something that we give extreme and dedication and importance to. It's with that understanding as we partner with parents that when a parent sends their child to us, to school, to spend the day with us, that they return home better than when they even left school. That they were at school, they learned something, they were well fed, they played and had fun with friends, whatever it may be, but that is our obligation, that's our responsibility. Now, when we're meeting the needs of parents, some with disparate views on raising children, we do so operating within the guardrails of the law. And so whether a bill is passed, a state board rule is passed, or board policy is enacted, we immediately begin and work to the success of those decisions. And so what you have before you here is one of those, for instances, when it comes to sensitive materials. We provided this handout to you, but in the spirit of true transparency, are we projecting currently?
Do we have the slides or do they? Are we good now? Okay, there you go.
Okay, so these aren't slides. We just wanted to show you what is available currently on our website that's available to all of the public. And so part of that, Ben, if you wouldn't mind going to the library book selection analysis. So much of the sensitive materials discussion is centered around our libraries or our media centers, but what we will focus on here, while looks like library, and that is certainly a part of the process, it also applies to curriculum, it applies to novels, adoption, it applies to ancillary materials, and that is also captured in policy. But Ben, would you mind going to the flow chart? And so this handout, and we can make all this available to you electronically as well. This handout captures what we feel is the process, similar to the Washington School District, of when a book is challenged. Now, we receive challenges. We have a formal challenge process. They usually come to the schools. Sometimes we get a district-wide challenge process. But what you see there on the left, on the library book, let's start with the library book deselection analysis. What you see on the left is the 76, 10, 12, 27 is what we've been referring to as the bright line rule. Furthermore, if you move to the right, if any of the challenges meet that requirement or that description, we also take into consider what is in state statute, 7610, 1201, and 1203, further definitions of that bright line rule. And when it meets those definitions, then the book is deselected. It's removed from our libraries. When we've had a book that has been challenged under that definition and through this flowchart, if you think anything that meets the 1227 of the bright line rule, if you look at the 1201, are the sexual descriptions or depictions in the book patently offensive to prevailing standards in the community? Well, yes. Then taking the book of the whole, does the average person with contemporary community standards find that it appeals to the purient interest in sex and minors? Well, yes, then we remove that book. Now, as we follow that process, and you can take a look at the flow chart as it moves through, we also began asking the question, as would be natural, is how did these books ended up on our shelves anyway? And so if you flip the page over, we also apply the same standard to selecting books in our district for use, whether or not in the library or ancillary materials or curriculum in general. And so as we have incorporated this in full transparency, Ben, if you wouldn't mind just going to our homepage.
So this is actually, if you go to our homepage at graniteschools.org, up here at the top, there's this Parent and Family Resource Guide, which is a tab on every page within Granite School District. You go to there and actually go under curriculum and materials. All these items that are available electronically right now to the public. I just got a records request from a media outlet for our current list of deselection. I denied it and said it's already on our website. So this clicks to our process, as he's indicated, the flow chart, how to make a request, and then this master list of current submitted materials. There's some other tabs here. Books currently under initial review, completed deselection request, and then appeals that are currently in process as well. So I've left it on this, all submitted challenges since 374 was passed.
So as we consider that, if when a complaint is made and the complaint surrounds a 1227 or the bright line, that immediate complaint is reviewed by our legal counsel, chief of staff, assistant superintendent, and director of media, library, and educational technology for those determinations. When that is made, those determinations, then we continue with what would be, if it's not that, a parent review process, as has been similarly described, as well as an appeal process as well. I would like also to note anytime a book is, or curriculum material that is in circulation is submitted as a concern, it is pulled from the shelves while under review. So as of today, we've had 94 book concerns or book requests for review, and we've been able to work through that process. On this, you would see, as Ben has mentioned, the book title, the author, the schools in which that book resides, the level, junior high or high school, elementary, so forth, type of request, data request, and and the state of that request, communicating back to those that have made the concern or filed the complaint. Generally, if it's not a 1227, then, and it is submitted as a specific school, then that specific school's community will review the book for determination for that local effort. That does not preclude a general district, because each of the districts, ours has no exception. We have an electronic library that's district-wide, and so we take a look at that as well. When it comes to the notion of what's currently on our library shelves, why wait for an appeal? We've also instructed our library assistants, our librarians, to also review what is on our library shelves. As you can imagine, our libraries have a lot of titles, and it takes a lot of time. But we have also opened up to essentially any patron in the Granite School District, employee, parent, and so forth, who would like to make a request for a review or an appeal, that they have the opportunity to do so as well.
In fact, actually, just after 374 passed, or just prior, I was speaking to Representative Moss over here. I don't know if she recalls, but she shared some material with me that was disconcerting, and I'm the one who made a deselection or reconsideration request. And so we've been very liberal on that front. If there's something inappropriate that's potentially has damaging effect to children, as pornography does, we want to get that information from anybody we potentially can.
Thank you. Does that conclude your presentation?
It does.
Can I just have to say thank you. I think you're the first district that has talked about the library book selection process and being proactive in applying this there, because if not, you're going to constantly just have a flood coming, right? So I appreciate that. You said that you've had 98 challenges. Did I remember that right?
94.
94. And how many have been deselected?
We've got actually some of those were appealed further in our process.
So they're still in the process.
So we actually have currently right now, we had 23 books initially removed. 26 were restricted out of those initial. So they were restricted to an older age group. And then 27 of those were retained, and then 43 of those were further appealed and are currently under appeal right now.
Okay, thank you for having that information for us. And again, thank you for this. This is actually really helpful, especially when we're looking at a committee bill and possibility of the idea of how library books are selected in the first place. To the committee for further questions, we have Representative Carol Moss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been told that all those bills have requests have been from 3 people. Is that
When you
correct?
say bills, do you mean books?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You just talked
Books though,
about-
right?
Yes,
Yeah,
books.
okay.
All those requests for removal have been from
From
3
6.
6 individuals. Okay, I
Yeah.
just wanted to clarify that. And then another question that was, well, actually an idea that was, a point that was brought to me by Julie Jackson, my school board member, was that initially they would take books off the shelf when they were reviewing them until they made a decision. But she said it's taking so long now, you don't have enough people that are reviewing it. You don't have enough parents. Many parents are reluctant to do this because they're afraid if they say they think the book's okay, they're going to be harassed by other parents. So this is problematic. So she's concerned that because this process is taking much longer, that a lot of these books should be available in the meantime if they're library books. And then I have just one more.
I think Julie's back here, so she can wave and say hello. We share that concern with respect to our parent committee. The district level appeal process has been in force and was trained in January, and we've only had 2 determinations since that time on that appeal process. So what we have done is gone out and solicited. Our parent committee is made up of representatives designated by our board members to make sure that it's a representative of each of those respective precincts and our diverse communities that we serve in the 330 square miles that Granite School District serves. And so we have asked those board members to provide additional parents to be a part of that committee. The reason we've altered our process, we considered doing a lottery, we considered doing some of these other things, but frankly, we want parents who are going to come and represent their respective community within their individual precincts, and so we've asked our board members to nominate those parents to serve on those committees.
And I appreciate that because board members do not have time to read all the books that are challenged. One more question. When I was teaching, those many years I taught, every book that I taught or was on an outside reading list had to come from an approved list at Granite District. And if we wanted to add something, which we did over the years, more diversity in literature, more modern literature, there was a committee that reviewed it. And so I never taught anything. I mean, even though a few parents might have said, I don't want my kid to read this book, I never taught or assigned anything that wasn't, quote, approved. Is that still in existence? And I want to just say, it worked really well, in my opinion.
It does. We still have that graphic novel review committee and process, and for them, as the laws are changing or newly implemented, these same rules apply to that. And so we do have an approved list of novels. If that's made an initial determination, if there is a novel on that list that someone has a concern with, it can be appealed as well. And same rules apply.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, seeing one question from the committee, Representative Lisenby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we can talk after. I just wanted to ask you this on the record, and I know we're trying to get to public comment, and we have a semi-soft stop at 11:30.
We're blowing past
we
it,
can,
but yeah.
we're going to blow past 11:30. That's awesome. I love it. We are a dedicated committee. On your flow chart here, which great work. Thank you. I agree for the most part. I have a question on, you get to your 1227 little I, 2 little I, 3 little I, and then you go to are the sexual descriptions or depictions, blah, blah, blah. That first one, and then after that, if that's a yes, why do we go to taken as a whole?
So that is per 7610-1203 in state code, where it essentially asks the question, with contemporary community standards, find that the book appeals to the appearing interest of sex in minors specifically.
Sure. And I can appreciate that, but as I said, we are going to clarify that, and it is unclear, I think. I get the interpretation, but I think it's unclear and needs to be clarified. But I think if something fits the bright line definition of pornography in our schools, at that point, it should be removed from the shelves so that we're not distributing pornography to minors. But that's just,
sure.
That's something we will clarify in our committee bill, and happy to discuss with you after.
Can I speak to that just very briefly as well? I don't know if Representative Pulsifer remembers, but previous to 374, her and I had this conversation on 1201 and 1203, and whether, because that is part of the criminal statute, there's a challenge there on how that applies with respect. So, and then 374 came out. We had a great working relationship with Representative Ivory and on that bill, and testified in favor of it. With respect to that, I do want to clarify that we've not, when something has we call it a 1227 committee, not a bright line. So just when we have a 1227 violation, rarely does it not also exceed that standard in 1201 or 1203. And we've not seen something be retained as a result of those other two gray boxes. I wanted to be very clear about that.
Well, and Madam Chair, if I could just follow up, I appreciate the ongoing conversations we'll have as we work to clarify that with you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further questions, we appreciate you taking the time to come up here today, and we'll make sure that we have your flyer at the very least so that we can have that as committee materials. Great. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
So we are going to, and for the committee, we're going to try and be really brief. My understanding is USBE has been able to get this down to 5 minutes. I'm actually looking and asking. Okay, come on up. So we'll do that. So that way, we do want to allow for public comment. We know there are people, I have the public comment in front of me. But we do want to give, I know we really appreciate it. And if you can have your full deck of slides, we'll get those to us so that we can review them as a committee. But go ahead.
Thank you. Jenny Earl, Vice Chair, Utah State Board of Education. This is Davina. No, I practiced this, so I didn't get it wrong. Davina Southoff, and she is our library media specialist. And we're gonna, we sat back there. At first we were relieved, we didn't hear our name, and then we're like, oh, nope, we're on.
Okay.
So, which is great. We're glad to be here. Thank you for having us. Just a couple things. Just coming from the law from 53G 10-103, that we are to provide guidance and training And we also provided a model policy. And components of those model policies can be found throughout the state. Districts didn't have to use our model policy. They could use any policy that they wanted, working with either other entities or their legal staff. So just a clarification there, they may have used components that came from our policy, but they didn't. There were a few that adopted most of it. Let's see. So we provided model policy, and then we'll hit a couple of the rules in just a second that we put the language for 53G 10-103 into, and those have to do with instructional materials that we oversee on our level. So, and then also any complaints. Let me hit that too. And here's the rules that we put this into. We put it into the school libraries rule. We put it in the process for members of the public to report violations of statute and board rule. We also put it into the parent review of public education curriculum. We have a rule for that, so we placed it in there. We also placed it into our Instructional Materials Commission operating procedures, so that as we looked at instructional materials, we would use that as a mechanism for measurement. Okay, and I'll turn the time over to Davina.
Davina Southoff, Library Media Specialist, State Board of Education. Thank you for having us. So USB has provided support to both K-12 educators and higher education with implementation of 53G. What does that look like? So we have held engagements with LEA supervisors one-on-one across the state, curriculum directors, Utah Technology Coordinators Council, higher education faculty and teacher preparation programs, and then also LEA educators in conjunction with guidance from their LEA legal counsel and according to their LEA individual policies.
And we've had 15 USBE hotline concerns when it comes to sensitive materials. All of those have dealt with the process or the outcome. So specifically, a disagreement with the outcome of a local board or their process type of a thing. So we're trying to hurry here. And then we also have the ability, if someone disagrees with the process that a local board, that they violated the local board's process, let me say that carefully, they can appeal to us to have it looked at. And the AAG from our office will take a look at that, and then we have a process that we would go through for that. So.
And on one of the first slides, Vice Chair Earl mentioned that we were reporting to the Education Interim Committee back in October of 2022, which was what was expected or that fulfilled the Utah Code requirement. Beyond that, USBE requested that LEAs provide a voluntary submission of where they are implementing the statute. And so we requested that in January 2023 and then also again in June 2023. And so the data that you're looking at here is our most recent request. And of those LEAs who were able to respond, this data represents 79% of Utah students. And so as you can see, we had a total of 547 total titles that were requested to have a review or a challenge. And so that does mean there's going to be duplicates here. So it might be that two different districts had the same title, and that would be represented with two titles in these numbers here. So of those 547 titles for the 2022-2023 school year, 120 were retained and 263 were removed. And that may not only have been a sensitive materials removal, it may have also been a age appropriateness or something like that. 49 were restricted, and what that refers to is restricted might mean only junior high and high school can have access to that book, or only high school can have access to the book. And then 55 titles are still in process across the state. Of those who responded to our survey, 36 are under appeal, so they already went through a committee, and then the committee, or a parent or a community member of standing appealed that decision. And then 24 titles that were requested to be reviewed were not found in the school, whether lost, removed from the building, or potentially weeded at some point and not altered in the catalog. So.
Okay, so just a few things. Just as we have been reviewing over where to move forward, right? Those next steps, review implementation. I think today was a perfect example of looking at how it's been implemented and And I think as legislators and as boards, we can look and say, okay, what was working well? What hasn't worked well? And then reflect upon that and make changes as needed. Increase access to information on LEA determinations. That's one thing we can do. We can provide just a landing spot, and you can help me if I get this wrong, but a landing spot where we can put the access to local district webpage. We're not going to maintain that, but we can provide somewhere where someone could go to our state site and say, oh, I'm going to click on Davis's, or I'll click on whatever district or whatever LEA, so they have a quick access to look where the information is. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 clicks deep. And then there may be further clarification and guidance on some of the definitions and some of the usages within the law itself and in policies. And then potential access to statewide resources to support LEA implementation. There's a variety of resources starting to surface around the nation that may be usable and accessible for LEAs looking at books to help kind of be proactive as to what's coming in and what they want into their schools. And just really quick, I just wanted that our school boards make content-based decisions. State boards do not. That is a local decision. The libraries are local decisions, but we are here to assist and help in any way that we can. And so, is that it? Okay, I think that was it.
Work. That was impressive. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Are we
We'll
good?
get the full deck of slides, and obviously
Perfect.
this is going to be an ongoing discussion, and we have a committee bill file open as well.
Thank
So
you.
thank you very much. We appreciate it. All right. Thank you, committee members. So we are going to jump into public comment. If you're online, I need you to raise your virtual hand if you're interested in making public comment, so that we can have an idea of how many of you are there. But what I would like to do is, and I appreciate everyone who's been here and those of you who participated as well by raising your hands when you agreed with people. We do have a hard stop that we are working up against. So we are going to start by taking 8 people in the room. There was a sign-up sheet at the beginning that everyone was invited to sign on. So I'm just going to go down it with the first 8, and then we'll take 3 from online, and you're going to have a minute. And as always, we have received a lot of emails, but please feel free as well, because I know a minute isn't a lot of time, to send your comments to all of us. Our committee emails are all online on the committee page when you click on us. I also would just like to give a reminder and appreciate so far, this isn't an opportunity to distribute porn, is not an opportunity to read from books that are in question right now. So I just want to make sure that everyone is clear on that. And we'll start, like, did I say 8 out of the room? 7 or 8 in the room? Okay, we'll do 8 in the room, 3 online. So let me just run down the list so you can line up. This is based off of the lineup we have here. Kristen Von Brunt, Lori Starkey, Laura Lee Salamino, Charlotte Gatrell, and then Emma Mutos, Brooke Stevens, how many is that? Delane England, and Beverly Alstrom, if you can just come line up. Okay, great. And go ahead and come up. We'll have, actually, the first 2, you can come sit down just so we're most efficient use of time, and then we'll take our 3 from online after that. And let me just get the timer ready to go. And please remember to state your name and if you represent an organization. Okay, go ahead.
My name is Kristen Van Brunt, and I am a teacher and instructional coach in the Davis School District. I am speaking as an individual, not as a representative of my district, and really just wanted to talk about the transparency, just because that comes up every year. New bills come up every year asking for more transparency. This will be my 30th year in the classroom this coming year, and I feel like we are more transparent than ever. I have every lesson, every handout, every assignment, every video that I show in my class is on my Canvas page. And every parent has access to that on a daily basis, 24 hours a day. And I feel like more transparency is not necessary. It's already there.
Thank you. Thank you for your time today. All right, go ahead. And
My name-
congratulations on 30 years of service. That's a big deal. And then if the next person just wants to come, it's like up on deck, great. Okay, go ahead.
My name is Laureen Starkey, and I want, first of all, to thank you as a parent, and I'm representing myself as a parent and a grandparent. I would like to express my appreciation for concern over such an issue as having a close family member being exposed to pornography as a child and subsequently being incarcerated for child molestation, and having the implications and the repercussions that destroy families when this thing is not attended to. I also, as a parent that was very active in engaging with students, my students and teachers, and appreciating the fact that there is oversight. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, we've already got our 8 in the room who had signed up first on it. So the cutoff right there after the nice lady with glasses and red hair. So we're going to take 8 in the room and then we'll have 3 online. Okay, go ahead, and then next person.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Thank you for hearing my comments. My name's Laura Lee Salamino, and I'm an English and psychology teacher at an alternative high school with some of the most at-risk students in our state. My expertise, my master's, is in trauma and resilience. I'm currently seeking a doctorate of education and leadership, and education saved me. And so some of the ideas of resilience education is if all people are resilient and we teach those skills, we can make people resilient. And so I just wanted to speak to community connection and representation is incredibly important among literature. And it's, as Ray Bradbury said, you don't have to burn books to destroy a culture, you just have to get people to stop reading them. And I think it's incredibly important to allow those who are reading to connect to ideas that represent them as a person. I appreciate the idea and the concept behind this, but I am teaching kids at a 3rd grade reading level, and we have to change daily. And so that's really what I want to bring home, is that we have to get them to connect to reading first.
Representative Elizabeth, do you have a question for, is it Laura Lee? Did I get that right? Okay, go ahead. Let me get your mic on. Go ahead.
Thank you for your comments. I agree, it's really important to have broad literature available, and it is available to individuals in the community. I personally have a library in my home of over 6,000 volumes. I love books. I encourage my children to read them. I would just ask you, is there something you disagree with in particular in the 1227 definition? Are there any depictions of illicit sex, of human genitals in a state of sexual stimulation or arousal, acts of human masturbation, sexual intercourse or sodomy, fondling or erotic touching of human genitals or pubic region that you think are appropriate for young people?
No, and that's the thing. I don't think anything that I'm teaching in the classroom, I don't think there's anything that any teacher is presenting that is at that level. I don't think there's anything that's pornographic that is being presented to students.
Thank you.
I mean, we read Something Wicked This Way Comes and Tuesdays with Maury. Like, there's nothing like that. But I think the concern is the oversight of taking out literary classics.
Absolutely, literary classics, when taken as a whole, that have the SNAP's values should be retained. And under our policy, they would be.
One of my, I was restricted from reading Little Women in 3rd grade, and so I had to fight to be able to read that in 3rd grade, and that's the kid I was, and I read Great Expectations and The Last of the Mohicans before I was in 6th grade, and so age appropriate as deemed limiting also limits a child's developmental abilities.
Do you think any of those books would fit under our 1227 Bright Line rule?
Some of the age appropriate limitations, what I've seen is those are not available to kids in the elementary school level.
But they don't actually fall under our 1227 Bright Line rule.
Correct,
So that would
correct.
actually be under the broader definition, which includes case law from the federal level. That's not something the state has done in particular, right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up should be Charlotte. Is that correct? And then next on deck we have Emma, then Beverly, Brooke, and Delane. And then for those online, we'll be hearing from Riley, Andre, and Francis. Okay, go ahead, Charlotte.
Okay,
Hey, I'm Charlotte Gatrell. I'm an educator in the Jordan School District, and I'm commenting as an individual, not representing my district. The Jordan School District, in the training that they mentioned that I received, has also interpreted the Sensitive Materials Schools Law to mean that I cannot gift students books unless they are on an approved book list. So what that looked like this year, at the end of the school year, I was cleaning out my classroom library. I had a lot of leftover books from the teacher before me. And instead of being able to give my students those books to have them choose to take that home for summer and to read to help them continue the progress that they made this year, I would have to go through an Excel sheet that they've created and search every single one of those books to determine if I could give them to my students. The end of the school year is an extremely busy time, so I ran out of time to see if Hank the Cow Dog was on the approved list. And I teach at a Title I school. My students need these books over the summer. They don't have access to these, and so that is a potentially unintended consequence of this law, but know that my students, these children that I teach, are being impacted in a negative way by having books taken from them.
Thanks for your comment. I will follow up with Jordan because that's nowhere in our state law that it would require that. And so it seems like that's a district rule.
I can email that.
That'd be awesome if you can email me. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, go ahead.
First of all, I would love to thank Madam Chair Perucci and the other members of this distinguished committee. My name is Emma Meadows. I am speaking as an individual, though I do work for Salt Lake City School District at Horizonte Instruction and Training Center. We are now seeing that these broad sensitive materials bills are having some really unintended and quite dire consequences. And I would like to say that I worked very hard to get into my classroom. I worked roughly 7 years in school, and I'm now licensed by you all. The state, and I painstakingly finished my coursework, practicum, student teaching, and even the PPAT a year and a half ago. What I teach is not a secret. Everything, and I mean everything I do, ends up on Canvas. And I do not want to put pornography or even pornography-adjacent materials on my shelves. There's not an educator I know who desires to do this, and our ethics trainings and duties strictly forbids it. It is already the law to become a licensed educator. I work in alternative education. My students are very different from, say, students in Rich, Daggett, or Utah, or Grand County.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, next up.
My name is Brooke Stevens. I'm with Utah Parents United, and I want to thank you for hearing this. This is so important. And I want to thank especially Washington School District for being proactive in removing the books, and for those schools that have removed the pornographic books. We as parents have hoped to help with this process and not make it more work by providing at ratedbooks.org excerpts and page numbers so they could see it. And I do want to say that we do need your help because as Jordan's school district was talking, they only remove it per title, and I emailed all of you the 3 books that they have retained, and there is no way to challenge them further at Tricks, Tilt, and People Kill People, and those have all been retained, even though they clearly violate the Bright Line rule. Also, the process in Davis hasn't worked 59 times. The book that you saw that violates the Bright Line rule will remain on their shelves for 3 years. And so thank you for doing all that you can, because there are many parents and many kids still being affected.
Thank you. All right, and then next up, are you Beverly?
I'm Beverly.
Okay, thank you. And then that would mean Delane is last in the room. Great, thank you. Okay, go ahead, Beverly.
Thank you. I'm Beverly Ahlstrom. I'm a teacher at Davis High School. I'm here as an individual.
Can you just pull the mic up to you? Sorry, I've maxed out the volume. Go ahead.
Sorry.
You're good. There you go.
I'll use my teacher voice.
There you
I'm
go.
Beverly Ahlstrom. I teach in Davis School District. I'm here as an individual today. I wish to speak only to the unintended consequences of the material reviews ongoing in the state. I'm a gay straight alliance advisor and a teacher in a high school. Groups of students gather in my classroom during lunch. They do a lot of talking. I listen. I don't participate in the conversation. And what I'm hearing from the small ones in my classroom are that LGBTQ brown and black students are feeling targeted by the reviews. They feel they have little representation and voice, and they're losing what voice they had. They speak of moving to safe states. In the eyes of the youth, Utah is not a safe state. Already at high risk for bullying, depression, anxiety, dropout, and suicide, anything that increases risk to minorities must be guarded against. I support the sensitive materials laws, but please consider protections for minority groups. in the sensitive material bills. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and then Delane?
Thank you, Delane England, representing United Women's Forum and Utah Eagle Forum. I am a mother of 6, and I am a teacher. The biggest problem that I see with the problem with pornography in our schools is that pornography is being purchased and brought into our schools. And so now we're spending a lot of time and a lot of resources and a lot of energy trying to figure out how to get it out. Really, we need to stop the flood. We need to stop pornography from entering into our schools. Under the umbrella of books being relatable, there's lots of ways books can be relatable and lots of topics, but when books are sexually relatable, they're inappropriate, and that's not called relatable, it's called grooming. Many books are, okay, my time is up.
About 10 seconds.
Children are suffering from social and emotional issues. Pornography is the reason for much of this. No child should ever be sexualized in school. There's no justifiable reason to have pornography in schools. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks for consolidating your comments. I know that's difficult. We'll jump online. So Riley Pickle, again, you're going to need, I've already shared your name, but you're going to need to state your name and where you are from. Correct, it's where they're from. Okay, go ahead, Riley. And for those who are waiting online, we're promoting you to panelists, so you have to accept that. Okay, Riley, you're good. Go ahead. And you've got 1 minute, just so you know we have a timer going.
Okay, thank you. My name is Riley Pickle, and I work as an educator in Salt Lake City School District. I am speaking as an individual and not a representative of my district. As the educators before me have described, every parent signs disclosures for all their child's classes that are required to tell you exactly what your child is going to be reading. Additionally, teachers provide learning materials on our Canvas pages, which all of you have access to. We already give you the transparency you're asking for. The distrust for your teaching professionals being demonstrated disgraces my profession, colleagues, and students. I'm feeling really disrespected in this committee meeting. I'm a professional with a master's degree and don't know what else I can do to prove to you that I'm qualified to choose literature for your children that is not considered pornographic. I do not want to harm your children, and my librarian colleagues are the same. We do not want to hurt your kids. You will be losing teachers and librarians if you keep disrespecting us this way. You will have no one to teach them. There will be no books left. There will be no teachers. There will be no librarians. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Andre. Go ahead, Andre. You'll need to unmute yourself. Okay.
Hello?
Yep, there you go. Go ahead.
There we go. Cool. Thank you so much. I'm Andre LaFleur. I reside in the Granite School District. I'm a concerned parent and speaking as an individual. I am not with any organization, nor am I speaking for any organization that I belong to. I believe that children are receiving pornography at home with their friends, not in school libraries. My first exposure was in adolescence by friends of mine, in spite of the school books that I read in school, that probably did violate this bright line rule. Our children should not have access to pornography, obviously, but it's happening at home. It's not happening at school. I dispute the statement that the bright line rule offers an objective measure of pornographic material, as pornography is something that is culturally defined and culturally asserted. It is not a state of the universe. I thoroughly disagree that violations of the bright line rule in specific portions of a work should cause it to be removed. The Bible clearly falls in this category, as it's largely the Song of Solomon that violates this rule. I would read passages as proof, but that would violate the rules of this forum. Most of all, I ask, why are we spending so much time on this issue when there are much larger issues that our kids are facing? The bright line rule sounds more like an attempt to limit the abilities of educators to prepare our children to enter the workforce and uphold their civic responsibilities than it does to protect our children. I'd prefer my taxes go to addressing that.
Appreciate that. Thank you. All right, last up, Francis.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson and Chairwoman Ferrucci for letting me speak today. I'm Frances Floresca Baldwin, and I'm an education policy analyst and researcher affiliated with various groups around the country, but I am representing myself today. I'm also a former Utah student, having attended school here from preschool all the way up to graduating college in 2019. Virtually no one is in favor of books being banned, and no one is stopping anyone from reading these books outside the classroom. And that decision is up to the parents. People, libraries, and schools need to better distinguish the difference between banned books and what is child appropriate as defined by Utah law. Banned books like Fahrenheit 451 and the Hunger Games, which have been banned in the past, are not the same as books like Fun Home and Genderqueer showing full-on sexual images. Several of our lawmakers earlier explained how Utah law is clear about bright line standards. If a book meets those bright line standards, it does not need a review committee. And if someone can identify a book with clear sexual content, it could be out immediately with almost no review. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you, everyone. Again, we really wanted to make sure we had public comment, knowing there were about 7 other people on that list, so thank you, or excuse me, there were 5 other people had signed up. So thank you for those of you who came today to participate. Thank you to the committee for your patience here, and we do have a committee bill file that was opened, and so it's something we'll continue working on, and with that, I'll entertain one final motion. Motion to adjourn from Representative Berkland. That motion is non-debatable in order. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.